Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Lindsay Cutshall. Lindsay was born in 1982 in Ohio and grew up in a very religious family. She was an active and adventurous person, interested in sports, hiking, and extreme tourism. She attended Appalachian Bible College in West Virginia and dreamed of founding her own summer camp for children and teenagers. Jason, on the other hand, was born in 1978 in Michigan and also grew up in a deeply religious family. He was interested in hiking tours, mastering survival in the wild, and had leadership qualities. The couple met in 2002 during a hiking trip in Appalachia and immediately felt a mutual connection. They got engaged 6 months later and planned to get married in September 2004, with big plans for their future together. Lindsay and Jason, senior counselors at a Christian summer camp in California, had plans to start their own relationship. In the summer of 2004, they decided to take a weekend trip to the San Francisco area. They informed their colleagues in advance, leaving 2 experienced counselors in charge, and promised to return by Monday. They set off in Lindsay's 1992 red Ford Tempo, but that was the last time anyone saw them alive. By Sunday evening, they hadn't returned, but no alarm was raised, as everyone was confident they would arrive late that night or early Monday morning. However, when they still hadn't returned after the morning roll call at 8 a.m., their colleagues contacted the police and informed the missing couple's families. The police investigation faced a significant problem. No one knew precisely where they had gone. They had planned to explore around San Francisco, and their love for adventure and extreme leisure made it possible they could be in remote areas with no communication or civilization. While the police waited for the legally mandated 2 days, during which the missing were expected to report themselves, relatives and friends organized a search effort. They distributed flyers with photos of the couple and requested anyone who might have seen them to respond immediately. By Tuesday, law enforcement had joined the search operation, focusing on San Francisco, its suburbs, and surroundings. However, the area was vast, making it impossible to thoroughly search it. A friend's suggestion that the couple loved wild, rocky beaches prompted the police to focus on these areas. The search yielded no results for several days, and hope of finding the couple alive was rapidly diminishing. Then, on Wednesday, August 19th, a patrol helicopter flying over one of the rocky wild beaches reported finding 2 bodies in sleeping bags. The police arrived at the scene to find the red Ford Tempo parked on a cliff near a lookout point and a steep trail leading directly to the beach. The car was identified as belonging to Lindsay Cutshall. Descending the trail to the beach, officers found 2 individuals in bright sleeping bags. Initially, it seemed like they were just sleeping, but they didn't respond to calls or noise. Upon closer inspection, officers discovered that the sleeping bags contained a young man and woman, both showing no signs of life. A brief examination suggested that they had died from gunshot wounds to the head, and the distinctive smell of decomposition indicated they had been there for more than a day. All of the victims' belongings, including mobile phones, wallets containing bank cards and cash, were found beside them, ruling out robbery as a motive. The keys to their parked car above were also visibly placed, eliminating car theft as a motive. Investigators immediately suspected that the deceased were the same young couple who had gone missing last week near San Francisco. This was later confirmed by documents found nearby, identifying them as Lindsay Cutshall and Jason Allen. The investigation revealed that the couple's bodies had no signs of physical or intimate assault, except for the gunshot wounds to the head. It appeared that Lindsay and Jason were sleeping peacefully at the time of the incident and didn't have a chance to react or defend themselves. The lack of signs of struggle or escape attempts suggested a swift and brutal act, resembling an execution or vendetta. The questions surrounding the case multiplied, but no answers were forthcoming. There were no signs of anyone else having stayed in the area, and the secluded beach was only accessible via a steep trail. Despite efforts, no shell casings were found nearby, leading investigators to theorize that the shooter either took them or threw them into the ocean. The shots had been fired at close range into the victims' heads, indicated by specific traces. An empty beer bottle from a rare brand, not commonly found in the area, was discovered a few meters from the sleeping bags. Since the victims didn't drink alcohol, it was possible that the bottle belonged to the shooter. This was considered a significant lead, although it was unclear whether it had any connection to the shooter or the crime. One theory proposed that the couple might have had a conflict with someone the day before the tragedy, and their opponent returned at night with a weapon to settle the score. Although Jason and Lindsay were very friendly with everyone, it was possible that they might have inadvertently displeased someone. The investigation considered the possibility that the shooter was intoxicated or mentally unstable. A crucial clue was found in the rare Marlin brand rifle, .45 caliber Model 18, produced in 1994, which was identified from the bullets extracted from the victims' skulls. Based on this, investigators speculated that the shooter was likely a male acting alone, possibly a hunter or firearm enthusiast. To piece together their final hours, investigators analyzed the photos they took and the guest book entries they wrote in the tourist cabin near the lookout point. They had stopped at a fishing pier about 20 miles away, which was confirmed by witness accounts and photographs. They had searched for a place to stay overnight, but found no vacancies in nearby hotels due to the peak tourist season. They then dined at a local restaurant, took a walk, and set off again in the evening. Witnesses reported that they were friendly and showed no signs of conflict. However, they had decided to camp on the prohibited beach, using their sleeping bags instead of a tent, believing they faced no threats on a warm August night. The investigation narrowed down the time frame of the crime to between 11 p.m. on Saturday and dawn on Sunday, when the couple likely went to sleep but did not survive until morning. Initially, suspicion fell on a local drifter who was seen nearby on the evening before the crime, but he was quickly cleared due to lack of evidence and DNA mismatch. The investigation into the double homicide stalled for nearly 2 years until the spring of 2006, when the police decided to release details of the weapon used in the crime and offered a $50,000 reward for any useful information. This led to around 1,000 calls, although most did not advance the investigation. However, the police became interested in 26-year-old Sean Gallen, who was pointed out by several locals. According to them, Gallen collected firearms and bladed weapons, behaved aggressively, and was frequently involved in conflicts, threatened acts of violence, and occasionally damaged other people's property. Gallen was arrested and questioned, but he had previously been on the police's radar for brawling, hooliganism, and driving under the influence of alcohol and drugs. He indeed had an impressive collection of weapons, but the specific rifle in question was not among them. Verifying his alibi from 2 years prior proved impossible, and his DNA did not match the sample found on the beer bottle at the crime scene, so Gallen had to be released. Simultaneously, another suspicious and aggressive drifter, 61-year-old Joseph Henry Burgess, came under scrutiny. He was often seen with a firearm, frightening local residents. It was discovered that in the late 1970s, Burgess lived in Canada, where he joined the Commune of the Children of God, positioning himself as a deeply religious person. However, he soon had a conflict with 2 young people that escalated into outright enmity, and a few weeks later, these individuals were found lifeless, each with several close-range gunshot wounds to the head. Notably, their bodies were also discovered on a beach in sleeping bags, seemingly taken while they slept. By the time the police arrived, Burgess had vanished, and his guilt was proven through numerous left-behind clues. However, he could not be convicted as he had fled to the USA, crossing the border illegally, and managed to evade capture for nearly a quarter of a century. Fast forward to 2017 in Forestville, California, a tragedy unfolded one night on March 14th. Gunshots rang out in the Gallen family home, prompting alarmed neighbors to immediately call the police. The victim was 35-year-old Seamus Gallen, and the perpetrator was his older brother, Sean. An argument had erupted between the siblings, during which Sean, under the influence of prohibited substances, grabbed a firearm and discharged 3 bullets into his younger brother. The police recognized the shooter's name, as Sean had previously been detained as a suspect in a double homicide on a beach, but was released due to a lack of evidence. Since then, he had been on the police's radar twice for property damage and making threats, but had only received fines. It was also discovered that the detainee was an avid hunter and had a hobby of crafting knives and other bladed weapons. Those around him described him as antisocial, aggressive, and unpredictable. After taking his brother's life, Sean attempted to flee but was almost immediately apprehended. Law enforcement reopened the case and took a closer look at a man who was a potential suspect 13 years earlier. On his social media, he had posted pictures of his large collection of weapons and claimed to have telepathic and extrasensory abilities. He believed he was on a special mission, receiving assignments from space, which suggested that he had a disturbed mind. The police suspected that he had serious mental health issues. He refused to cooperate with the investigation, spoke nonsensically, and maintained his innocence. However, when detectives checked the personal messages on his deceased brother's social media page, they found something interesting. Back in 2006, when a $50,000 reward was offered for information on the double homicide case, Sean's former girlfriend had sent a message to his brother, suggesting that she could claim the reward by turning in her ex-boyfriend. They both knew the truth, but kept silent. Unfortunately, it was no longer possible to question either of them, since the brother had been shot and the woman had died in a car accident 2 years earlier. When shown the printouts of the messages between his former girlfriend and his brother, Sean surprisingly confessed and began to give a detailed account of the crime. Despite it being over 13 years since the double homicide, Sean remembered the details of that night vividly. He claimed that he had left his house with a Marlin rifle, intending to hunt in a wooded area. He wandered aimlessly for a couple of hours before descending to a wild beach, which he claimed was a spot to encounter bears. As he walked along the shore, he spotted 2 bright sleeping bags and discovered a young man and woman sound asleep inside. He stood watching them for several minutes before suddenly hearing voices in his head commanding him to end their lives. Sean claimed this was the mission from space he could not ignore. He placed the barrel of his rifle almost against the young man's head and pulled the trigger. The sound woke the young woman, but before she could comprehend the situation, a second shot ended her life as well. Sean Gallen committed a brutal double homicide on a beach. After shooting the couple, he collected the shell casings and took them away in an empty beer can. He then gave the rifle to his father, asking him to hide it. The father buried the rifle in the cellar of his old barn without asking any questions. Years later, when Sean was arrested, he blamed the voices in his head for ordering him to commit violent acts. His defense team claimed he was mentally ill and unfit to stand trial. However, a forensic psychiatric evaluation revealed that although Sean suffered from mental disorders exacerbated by substance abuse, he had deliberately planned and executed the crime. The evaluation showed that Sean was fully aware of his actions and had taken steps to cover his tracks and avoid police detection. This included killing the young man first, knowing the woman would be unable to resist, and taking the casings with him to hide evidence. What was surprising was that Sean's family members and former girlfriend had suspected or known about his involvement in the crime, but none of them had reported him to the police. Sean was eventually tried and sentenced to 2 consecutive life terms without parole. plus an additional 94 years for killing his own brother in 2017. He is currently serving his sentence in a special prison unit for dangerous inmates with mental disorders, where he is kept under close surveillance due to his aggressive behavior and claims of hearing voices. The motive behind the double homicide was never established, with Sean simply deciding to end the couple's family. Despite their efforts to infuse the holiday spirit into their home with decorations, gingerbread baking, and caroling, Kia couldn't shake off the sadness in her eyes. She held on to hope, awaiting Santa's arrival, yet deep down, she knew the greatest gift would never return. On what should have been Nadine's 32nd birthday, Phoebe, her sister, honored her memory with a heartfelt video tribute, concluding with Kia singing a song dedicated to their beloved mother. For Claire, life without Nadine was an endless cycle of torment, haunted by nightmares and memories. Daniel's name was taboo in their household, and David shared in their despair. Despite Christmas passing, grief shrouded them, unable to fill the void left by Nadine's absence. On January 14, 2020, Daniel faced court proceedings via video call, his lawyer requesting a psychiatric evaluation, approved by Judge David Kennedy. Daniel confessed to the murder, blaming intoxication from substances consumed that fateful night. The trial, overseen by Judge Michael Magram and a jury of 7 men and 5 women, was marked by prosecutor John O'Kelly's presentation of damning evidence, detailing Daniel's cruelty towards Nadine. Throughout the 3-week trial, Nadine's family faced the painful reality in the courtroom, while Kia chose to spend some days at home with her granddaughter. Daniel's lack of remorse, evident in his fake displays of affection towards his mother, disgusted Claire. Testimonies from the intensive care unit nurse painted a grim picture of Nadine's condition, further solidifying Daniel's guilt. Throughout it all, Daniel never offered an apology to Nadine's family, leaving Claire disillusioned by his insincerity. The chilling echoes of mutilated words reverberated mercilessly down the cold, shadowy corridors, each syllable plunging Claire's soul deeper into an abyss of agony. Dr. Linda's relentless discourse stretched over 2 grueling hours, meticulously detailing every gruesome injury inflicted upon Nadine. With each description, the weight of the brutality bore down heavily upon Claire's heart, a relentless assault on her senses. As Dr. Linda's voice pierced through the air, Daniel remained eerily composed, his demeanor untouched by the harrowing accounts laid bare before him. It was as though the suffering of Nadine and her shattered family were mere trifles to him, inconsequential in the face of his own self-absorption. Refusing to acknowledge his guilt, Daniel's defiance only served to amplify Claire's anguish. His steadfast denial, devoid of remorse or empathy, cast him further into the depths of his own depravity. Despite the damning verdict that condemned him to a lifetime behind bars, Daniel's indifference persisted, a stark reminder of the darkness that dwelled within him. But even as the gavel fell and justice was seemingly served, the wounds of Nadine's family festered, raw and unhealed. The leniency of Irish law, offering a mere 18 years for a life extinguished, felt like a cruel mockery, a mockery that Claire and Nadine's loved ones could not accept. In the unforgiving confines of Whitfield Prison, Daniel found himself marked for retribution, a target among predators hungry for vengeance. Isolated from his fellow inmates for his own safety, he remained defiant, his arrogance unyielding even in the face of imminent danger. Yet, fate's relentless hand struck again within the walls of Midlands Prison, where Daniel became the victim of another inmate's brutal assault. Hospitalized and scarred, he bore the physical remnants of his own malevolence, a grotesque reminder of the pain he had inflicted upon Nadine and those who loved her. Nadine's story, a tragic testament to the horrors of domestic violence, reverberated far beyond the shores of Ireland. Born in Arlo, a beacon of hope on the southeastern coast, her light was extinguished far too soon, leaving behind a legacy of sorrow and a family torn asunder by grief. In the summer of 2012, 3 sisters, Phoebe, Tanith, and Kayla, embarked on a journey of adventure. Among them was Nadine, a captivating 26-year-old woman with plans to explore the wonders of Australia. With a heart brimming with anticipation, Nadine looked forward to a vacation filled with thrilling escapades, sports, and the prospect of forging new friendships. Nadine's essence radiated a unique charm that captivated those around her. Her laughter and radiant smile had a way of enchanting everyone she encountered. Despite her outgoing nature, Nadine harbored a sensitive soul, always seeing the goodness in people. She treasured her family deeply, finding solace and support in their love. Photography became Nadine's passion as she sought to capture fleeting moments of beauty in the world. What began as a hobby soon blossomed into a successful career where Nadine used her talents to enhance the beauty of others. In matters of the heart, Nadine treaded cautiously, cherishing her independence and relishing the company of friends. However, fate intervened when she crossed paths with Daniel, a reserved yet intriguing man from Dublin. Despite their stark differences in demeanor, Nadine found herself drawn to Daniel's piercing gaze and quiet strength. Their connection deepened as they explored the exotic landscapes of Australia together, sharing intimate moments and dreams beneath the sun-kissed skies. Watching Daniel conquer the waves while surfing, Nadine saw admiration and affection reflected in his eyes. Despite the geographical distance and the mysteries surrounding Daniel's life in Dublin, their bond grew stronger with each passing day. Nadine and Daniel's time together in Australia was a symphony of enchantment, promising a love that transcended boundaries. Their connection blossomed swiftly, although Nadine regarded it as a playful flirtation with no strings attached. Phoebe, Nadine's younger sister, was the first to be informed, followed by their mother, Claire, who quickly discerned the casual nature of the relationship. In June of 2013, Nadine returned home bearing unexpected news. She was pregnant with Daniel's child. Despite their attempts to forge a proper family, their relationship floundered, and Nadine found herself navigating the journey of motherhood alone when she gave birth to their daughter, Kia, in November of the same year. Phoebe stood steadfastly by her side, offering support and becoming a guiding presence in those early, challenging days of motherhood. Nadine's pregnancy marked a profound turning point in her life. Despite the dissolution of her relationship with Daniel, she embraced her role as a mother and found new purpose. Phoebe's unwavering support was instrumental during this period of transition. Nadine's story, though tinged with tragedy, is a testament to the power of love and familial bonds. Disappointed by her relationship with Daniel, Nadine longed for a stable and loving environment for her daughter. However, Daniel showed no signs of maturing into a responsible father figure. While Nadine tirelessly worked to provide for Kia, Daniel remained stagnant, refusing to take on the responsibilities of parenthood. In 2016, desperate to create a sense of family for Kia, Nadine made a final attempt by renting a house where they could all live together. However, Daniel's failure to follow through shattered Nadine's hopes for reconciliation. It was a pivotal moment for Nadine, as she came to terms with the reality of Daniel's absence and the broken promises that had plagued their relationship. Despite the pain and disappointment, Nadine emerged stronger, guided by the love for her daughter and the unwavering support of her sister. In the end, Nadine's journey was not defined by the failures of her relationship with Daniel, but by her resilience and determination to create a better life for herself and her daughter. Although Nadine and Daniel had separated, she did not lose hope that Kia would be able to keep in touch with her father. Unlike Nadine, Claire knew that Daniel wouldn't change. His only passion was boxing, and his family and daughter were not important to him. Despite all the difficulties, Nadine stayed strong. She continued to take care of Kia, giving her the love and support that she herself had not received from her father. Even though her daughter grew up without a father, she had an example of a strong and ambitious mother who taught her to never give up. Claire suggested that Nadine go to Rome to celebrate her birthday. The trip took place in October 2019. Arriving in Rome, going out on the terrace and enjoying the air filled with the smell of coffee and fresh pastries, Nadine confessed to her mother that she was going through a difficult period in her life. Her relationship with Daniel did not lead to anything good. Nadine did not need him, and was good at being a mother. She liked her job, her home, and was proud of her achievements. Soon, Nadine was offered a job as a model. At that moment, she saw her future as promising and happy. Back in Ireland, Nadine was disappointed to learn that Daniel continued to make empty promises to visit Kia. One day, when Daniel was supposed to give Nadine money for their daughter, he asked for a meeting. Nadine immediately suspected that it was just an excuse to meet her and not Kia, but she could not refuse. At the same time, Nadine did not want to ruin Daniel's image in Kia's eyes. She still had hope to create a real family, although it seemed more and more impossible every day. Coming up with new excuses for the absence of her father, Nadine tried to protect her baby from disappointment and pain. She didn't want her daughter to suffer from Daniel's irresponsibility and ignorance. Despite this, Daniel did not want to break up with Nadine and let her go. He was afraid that she might start dating other men. Because of this, Nadine was forced to hide her personal life from him in order to avoid his constant control and threats. By the end of 2019, Nadine's life began to change. She left behind her relationship with Daniel. Despite this, Nadine looked forward to the future with hope and started dating a guy from Turkey. However, her attempts to keep this relationship a secret from Daniel were in vain. He found out about her new partner and was angry and furious. Unable to come to terms with the loss of control over Nadine, Daniel began to stalk her, turning her life into a nightmare. On December 5th, tired of the constant threats and insults, Nadine texted Daniel. She made it clear to him that their relationship was over and demanded that the harassment stop. Nadine firmly believed that this would put an end to this exhausting and tiring relationship. On December 13th, Nadine asked Daniel to babysit Kia as she was going to celebrate her aunt's birthday at a local pub. They agreed that Daniel would stay with Kia at Nadine's house while she spent time with her family. Daniel and Nadine lived in different cities. Daniel lived in London, and Nadine lived in Wicklow. On the night of December 14th, Daniel called Nadine several times at 11:57 p.m. and at 1:26 a.m., but there was no answer. Eventually, he sent her a message asking her to come back. Soon after Nadine returned home, she quickly changed her clothes, but what happened next remains unclear. However, we know that Daniel attacked Nadine and scared her 6-year-old daughter, Kia. One of the neighbors, Ayla Klenovich, heard the noise and screams, went to the house, and saw the open door to Nadine's apartment with the light on. She decided to check what was going on there. At the doorstep, Camila was met with a harrowing sight. Nadine lay sprawled on the floor of the hallway, with Daniel looming over her, his face twisted in a mixture of rage and panic. Overwhelmed with horror, Camila rushed back to her apartment, her trembling hands immediately dialing Nadine's family to relay the dreadful truth. As Claire listened to the tale, her demeanor turned icy, a whirlwind of unsettling thoughts racing through her mind, a foreboding sense settling in. Meanwhile, Daniel, consumed by his fury, fled the scene in his Volvo, leaving behind a haze of dust and the lingering stench of blood. Upon bursting into Nadine's apartment, a grisly scene unfolded before Claire's eyes. The walls of the hallway splattered with blood like strokes of an artist's brush, shattered glass and mirrors reflecting the gruesome reality of what transpired. Yet, this was only the beginning. At 9:50 a.m., Claire, Phoebe, and Kyle entered the kitchen, only to be met with a gut-wrenching sight. Nadine's lifeless body lay before them, torn and devoid of life. Simultaneously, some 20 miles away in the town of Lahr, Daniel's recklessness met its end as his car careened into a ditch. Emerging from the wreckage, Daniel appeared dazed, his eyes vacant, his trembling form coated in blood. Confessing to a bewildered witness, he spoke in a voice laden with despair, admitting to the heinous act, his words echoing like a plea for absolution. As Daniel was whisked away to the hospital in an ambulance, his murmurs of love for Nadine hung in the air, as if he sought forgiveness in his darkest hour. Meanwhile, chaos reigned in Nadine's apartment. Stepping through the threshold, paramedics and police officers were met with the thick scent of blood. The scene before them, a testament to the brutality that unfolded within. Among them, Paramedic Ian Clark was struck by the extent of the devastation. Broken dishes, shattered glass, and bloody footprints painted a grim portrait of a violent crime. Phoebe and Kyle, filled with grief and confusion. She lay unconscious, her body unrecognizable. An ambulance rushed Nadine to St. Vincent's Hospital, where she was admitted to the intensive care unit at 10:58 a.m. Doctors noted severe injuries to Nadine's head, neck, and chest, expressing concern over her condition, especially upon discovering 64 additional injuries of unknown origin on her body. Despite multiple blood transfusions, Nadine's critical condition remained stable. Claire, refusing to lose hope, stood vigilantly by Nadine's side, holding on to the belief that her daughter would return home. She surrounded Nadine with familiar belongings, including photographs, perfumes, and toys, hoping to provide comfort and support during this ordeal. Though unsure of what lay ahead, Claire was determined to weather the storm alongside her daughter, convinced that love and care would see them through. On December 16th, as Nadine fought for her life, Daniel faced a court appearance, ultimately being remanded into custody pending further trial. Later that afternoon, Claire accompanied Nadine for a follow-up examination of her cerebral cortex, praying for her daughter's strength to persevere. Tragically, on December 17th, between 3 and 4 p.m., Nadine drew her final breath, never regaining consciousness. Her most severe injuries proved fatal. The Irish police colonel, Dean McCarthy, deemed this violent crime one of the most heinous he had encountered. Dr. Linda Mogan, the chief state pathologist, conducted Nadine's autopsy at the city funeral home on December 18th. Left alone with her thoughts, Claire grappled with unanswered questions, struggling to comprehend the reasons behind the tragedy. The following day, Daniel recounted the harrowing details of the event. In the narrative of the assault, he recounted how he struck her and utilized the charger cord to strangle her. Initially, he targeted Nadine, delivering blows to her head despite her attempts to resist. Daniel persisted, employing various violent methods, including stabbing and strangling Nadine with the cord. Throughout the ordeal, Kia, Nadine's daughter, cried out, pleading with her father to cease the violence and spare her mother's life, but her pleas went unanswered. Despite Nadine's desperate struggles, Daniel's strength prevailed, and he continued the assault until morning. A funeral service was held on December 22nd at St. Mary and Peter's Church in Arlo, Nadine's hometown. Over 1,000 mourners gathered to bid farewell to her, with the church overflowing and hundreds more watching via live broadcast. 6 individuals solemnly carried Nadine's casket, adorned with scarlet velvet roses, resembling Snow White, peacefully at rest. In the front row, Nadine's mother, Claire, struggled to contain her tears, her eyes filled with love and admiration for her daughter. Surrounding her were grieving relatives and friends, openly expressing their sorrow. David, Nadine's father, approached the altar, his voice trembling with emotion and tears streaming down his face as he placed one of Nadine's handbags beside her casket, a poignant reminder of her elegance and charm. A family friend, Kyle, held a trembling photo of Nadine and Kia, radiating happiness and affection. Meanwhile, Kia, still grappling with confusion and grief, clung to her mother's coffin, unaware of the full extent of the tragedy. Phoebe, Nadine's sister, fought back tears as she brought a pair of shoes to the altar, the same ones Nadine had planned to wear to the prom. Tanith, another close friend, approached with delicate care, placing a photo album brimming with cherished memories on the polished wooden table. Each page held snapshots, capturing the essence of Nadine's vibrant spirit and radiant smile, images destined to eternally reside within the depths of their hearts. Priest Michael Moore, a beacon of sincere empathy, took his place at the altar, his countenance a reflection of the collective sorrow filling the chapel. With gentle yet firm words, he commenced the ceremony, his voice weaving a tapestry of eternal life and hopeful promises. To the grieving assembly, his words were like a soothing melody, offering solace to wounded hearts. In a moment of profound tenderness, Priest Michael turned his attention to little Kia, a beacon of innocence amidst the sea of mourning. With a paternal warmth, he expressed gratitude for the joy she had brought Nadine and tenderly voiced hope for her future, promising an abundance of care and love. He pledged that they, the gathered mourners, would stand as Kia's guardian angels, a shield against life's harshness. Phoebe and Tanith, their voices choked with emotion, stepped forward to speak the final words, their love and grief intertwining in a poignant tribute to their beloved sister. Tears flowed freely as they bid their farewells, their hearts heavy with the weight of loss. As the strains of funeral music filled the air, marking the close of the ceremony, Nadine's coffin was gently lowered into the earth, finding its final resting place in the hallowed grounds of San Gabriel Cemetery. Loved ones gathered to bid their last goodbyes, their whispered prayers, a solemn tribute to a life lost too soon. In memory of Nadine's spirit and to provide support for Kia, who now faced a future without parental guidance, the Nadine Lott Charity Fund was established. A testament to the enduring legacy of love and compassion, it would serve as a beacon of hope for those in need, ensuring that Nadine's light would continue. Megan Newton, born in 2001 to Michael and Sarah, also had a stepsister named Demi. However, Megan primarily spent her time alongside her mother Sarah, forging an incredibly tight-knit bond akin to best friends. Megan kept no secrets from her mother, while Sarah, in return, would often consult her daughter, who displayed wisdom beyond her years on various significant issues. The woman characterized her daughter as highly ambitious, dynamic, and affable. Megan's friends described her as someone with an excellent sense of humor, compassionate, and thoughtful. Her grandparents remarked that she possessed a golden heart from a young age, always prepared to lend a hand to others. In her elementary school days, Megan encountered a new classmate, a girl whose family had recently relocated to England from China. The girl faced significant challenges in understanding the curriculum and interacting with peers due to her lack of English proficiency. Consequently, the teacher placed her beside Newton, hoping the compassionate and helpful Megan would assist the newcomer. Megan embraced this role wholeheartedly, overcoming the language barrier to aid her classmate and adjusting to a new environment. By the time the girl moved back to China, she had achieved a respectable level of English proficiency. Megan's kindness and open-mindedness persisted into her teenage years and adulthood, finding expression in her passion for sports. Soccer, in particular, captured her heart, leading her to join the Stoke-on-Trent women's soccer team. Additionally, she engaged in coaching, dedicating her weekends to training young girls under 7 years old instead of resting, striving for her Level 1 coaching badge. Megan aspired to secure a sports scholarship in the USA. Her commitment to sports, especially soccer, was so profound that she chose to pursue a career in it, even getting a small tattoo of a soccer cleat to express her love for the game. Upon completing her schooling, Megan embarked on her college journey, aiming to pursue her passion further. Megan Newton, a promising student aspiring to become a sports therapist or physiotherapist, was the first in her family to attend a tertiary education institution. Despite her potential for a bright future, her dreams were tragically cut short in the spring of 2019. Megan led a busy life, balancing 3 part-time jobs. On April 19th, a seemingly ordinary day, she finished work at a local fish and chip shop and headed home around 10:20 p.m. Living independently in her own apartment, Megan enjoyed her newfound autonomy. After getting ready, she joined friends for a night out at a club in Hanley, where they danced and had drinks. By Saturday morning, a grim discovery was made in her apartment: Megan's lifeless body, naked and covered in blood, a victim of a brutal stabbing. This horrific event deeply affected the community, who remembered Megan as a vibrant and charming young woman. The apartment paperwork and IDs conclusively identified the deceased as Megan Newton, a young woman who was brutally murdered in her bedroom. Megan's family was promptly notified by the police upon their arrival, and they had to face the heartbreaking task of identifying their daughter at the morgue. Megan, whom they had cared for with great love and recently allowed to live independently, met a tragic end that they never could have imagined, even in their worst nightmares. The crime scene was immediately secured, and forensic experts were sent to Megan's apartment to collect any potential evidence. The autopsy revealed the horrifying extent of the attack on Megan. She was strangled first, losing consciousness due to the lack of oxygen, and then she received 9 stab wounds to her back that punctured both her lungs. Furthermore, it was clear that she had been sexually assaulted. The murder weapon, a kitchen knife that belonged to Megan, was found nearby. The forensic pathologist concluded that it was these stab wounds that led to Megan Newton's untimely death. The bloodied knife and apartment keys were sent to the lab in the hope that DNA analysis could identify the assailant. It was believed that the culprit had accidentally dropped the keys while leaving Megan's apartment after the murder. The investigation began with detectives reconstructing the events leading up the tragic incident by talking to Megan's friends and family. It was determined that Megan had spent the evening at a club before taking a taxi home in the early hours of the morning. The investigative team reviewed surveillance footage from the area around the nightclub and the route Megan took to get home. Effort to trace her final movements and possibly pinpoint the assailant drew their attention to footage showing Megan boarding a taxi accompanied by a friend and an unidentified young man, raising questions about this individual's identity and potential role in the crime. Subsequent video from within Megan's apartment complex showed the same young man again, this time within the premises. Luckily, a camera positioned in the common hallway offered a clear view of the entrance to Megan's apartment, allowing officers to monitor who came and went that night. The goal was to identify the murderer by scrutinizing the video recordings from the evening of the incident. At approximately 3:44 a.m., Megan was seen entering her apartment building's lobby with the same young man she had shared a taxi ride with around an hour before. They proceeded together towards her apartment, with Megan appearing cheerful and exhibiting no signs of apprehension or unease around the individual. Upon reaching her door, Megan used her keys to unlock it, and they both went inside. However, a particular moment caught the detective's attention. While Megan was unlocking the door, the young man stood behind her, scanning the area and even making eye contact with the camera lens at one point. This behavior immediately raised suspicions among the police. They pondered whether the young man had premeditated harming Megan, possibly after coercing her into sexual acts, and was checking for potential witnesses. Further scrutiny of the video footage from the remainder of the night revealed a disturbing fact. Only the young man exited the apartment the following morning around 5:54 a.m. He attempted to leave the building but realized he needed a special key fob to do so. He returned to Megan's apartment, momentarily retrieved the keys, and eventually managed to exit the building. The external surveillance captured him discarding an object where the blood-stained apartment keys would later be discovered by a neighbor. The most damning evidence of his involvement in Megan's death was obtained from another surveillance camera, which showed him walking away from the scene, inspecting one of his hands that appeared to be covered in blood. This critical piece of evidence marked a pivotal moment in the investigation. Identifying the young man as Joseph Trevor was swift due to a recent run-in with the law just the day before the tragic event. He had been arrested for possessing ketamine, a substance used both medically and in veterinary settings as an anesthetic and sometimes for pain management. The police officer who had apprehended Trevor immediately recognized him in the surveillance footage. Trevor, 18, hailed from a reputable family deeply rooted in the law enforcement community, with both his father and mother serving as police officers. He resided in a neighboring district and had a long-standing acquaintance with Megan Newton, as they had been high school classmates. Joseph led a seemingly typical life. He was academically successful and shared Megan's passion for sports, excelling in soccer to the extent of playing professionally for Newcastle Town and securing a sports scholarship in America with plans to relocate there after completing his studies. Like Megan, Joseph was pursuing higher education in Newcastle, poised for a promising future. To many who knew him, Trevor was perceived as a kind, affable, and sociable individual. Yet he harbored a less visible, volatile side to his character, capable of shifting from a jovial and engaging demeanor to one that was reclusive, brusque, and abrupt without any discernible trigger. This unpredictability left acquaintances unsure of which version of Joseph they would encounter on any given day. When the detectives in the Megan Newton case began to look more closely at Trevor's background, they came across some very unpleasant information about his past. Approximately 3 years earlier, at age 15, he was suspected of abusing another teenage girl because the attempt at intimate contact failed. He was not charged or punished. However, everyone around the school knew about the incident. After this incident, classmates at the school began to call Trevor a predator and child molester since the public arrest at the school could not go unnoticed. Now, for the police, this information became a warning because Megan was also subjected to forced sexual intercourse that night. Joseph Trevor was identified as the primary suspect in the assault case. Investigators focused on his movements that night. They already knew from surveillance footage that he was near the nightclub and got into the same taxi as Megan, later heading to her apartment with her. Detectives were unsure what Joseph Trevor did before arriving at Newton's home. They discovered that Joseph attended a party with school friends the previous evening. Coincidentally, they ended up in the same bar as Newton. Since they knew each other from school, they greeted each other and continued to enjoy their time separately. However, Joseph didn't stay long at the nightclub. Security noticed he had a packet of white powder and called the police. The squad that arrived detained Joseph and took him to the nearby police department. Despite his parents being in law enforcement, Joseph faced no legal repercussions. The officers unlocked his cuffs, seized the ketamine, and let him go, advising him to return home and avoid further drug use. Ignoring their advice, Joseph returned to the club where Megan was. He was denied entry, and around 2:40 a.m., he met Megan by the taxi queue. He shared his recent ordeal at the police station and his concern about facing his parents. Megan, always compassionate, let Joseph borrow her phone to contact a friend, but he couldn't find a place to stay. Seeing his distress, Megan invited Joseph to stay on her living room sofa. In the morning, once sober, he could decide how to approach his parents. Trevor gratefully agreed to Megan's offer, which explains why surveillance footage showed him entering a cab with Megan and her companion. He messaged his dad, falsely claiming he'd spend the night at a friend's place. The cab first dropped off Megan's companion before taking Megan and Trevor to her apartment on Fletcher Road. Surveillance recorded them entering the building and later captured Trevor discarding stained keys in the yard. Authorities believe that during those few hours, Trevor violently assaulted Megan, leading to her death. The evidence was clear, leaving Trevor with no way to dispute the accusations. Law enforcement was ready to apprehend him, and astonishingly, Trevor had already informed his parents about his role in Megan's death. After leaving the apartment just before dawn, Trevor went to a bridge over the A500 in Stoke-on-Trent. Sitting on the barrier with his legs hanging over, he seemed to be considering jumping. He perhaps sought an escape from the consequences of his deeds, contemplating suicide. Trevor had a history of depression and prior suicide attempts and had been seen on this bridge before. A bystander noticed Trevor and promptly alerted the authorities. They arrived quickly and transported him to the hospital for a psychiatric assessment. After evaluation, medical professionals deemed it safe for him to be discharged, and he returned home under the watchful eye of his father. Joseph revealed the whole truth to his mother. He could no longer carry the weight of his actions and was wary of the inevitable consequences of his deeds. After gathering his thoughts, he approached his mother and confessed his involvement in Megan Newton's death with the simple statement, "I did something bad." He also shared these confessions with a few of his friends, possibly driven by or other emotions, to admit to actions that couldn't be undone. Once Joseph's mother heard his admission, she quickly contacted the authorities to report his confession. However, by that time, the investigative team had already identified Joseph Trevor as their prime suspect through surveillance footage and were coordinating his arrest. The young man was taken to the police station for questioning, where he acknowledged being at Megan's residence that night, but couldn't provide details about the brutal attack. His account was consistent with surveillance footage showing their entry into her apartment. She had kindly offered him the couch for the night. Trevor claimed that their physical interaction was consensual and that after their intimacy, he blacked out. He had no memory of the subsequent events and couldn't clarify the specifics of the incident or his motivations. The only memory he retained from that night was Megan's apology. At 15, Trevor had also faced allegations of harassing a peer. He was ridiculed by his classmates, who labeled him with various derogatory terms. Some branded him a predator and charmer, and among them, Newton allegedly tagged him as Rolf Harris. According to Trevor's account, Ralph Harris, a famed Australian TV host, musician, and painter, was convicted of child abuse and other sexual offenses. These monikers deeply wounded Joseph throughout his youth. He endeavored to erase these bitter memories. Over time, Megan's apology for the schoolyard taunts abruptly revived these painful recollections, propelling him into a fit of anger. In that instant, he purportedly seized a knife. Nonetheless, the detectives dismissed his account, skeptical of his conveniently lapsing memory at a pivotal juncture. The law enforcement officers were persuaded that he was fully cognizant of his actions throughout. It's likely that Megan merely turned him away that evening. She offered him a place to stay out of friendship, recognizing his troublesome situation. Having known each other for years, attending the same school and now the same college, they shared numerous interests and aspirations for the future. Their mutual enthusiasm for soccer might have led her to believe it was safe to share her space with him overnight. Upon returning to the apartment, Joseph attempted to escalate their interaction to a more intimate level. Megan was not receptive and declined. This deeply frustrated Trevor, especially under the influence of alcohol and drugs. Disregarding her objections, he chose to use force in an effort to eliminate the risk of her reporting the incident. He decided to take drastic measures to ensure her silence permanently. Shortly after Megan Newton's tragic passing, Joseph Trevor faced charges for intentionally ending the life of his fellow student, along with committing 2 acts of sexual violence. The assault was discovered to have occurred in a manner involving multiple attacks. He was apprehended at his residence, and after several months the legal proceedings commenced, despite his initial partial admission. Joseph first refused to admit guilt, but later he changed his story. He acknowledged causing Megan's death, though he insisted the relations that night were consensual. He maintained this stance until the trial commenced on February 17, 2020. At the start of trial, he suddenly shifted his plea to guilty on all counts. This move seemed aimed at avoiding a lengthy trial, perhaps expecting that the jury would quickly dismiss his defense. As a result, Joseph received a life imprisonment sentence with eligibility for parole after a minimum of 21 years and 65 days. A dramatic moment unfolded in court when Trevor, during sentencing's conclusion, turned towards Sarah, Megan's mother, and silently mouthed, "Sorry." This action deeply infuriated her. Apologies at this juncture were meaningless and could neither amend the past nor alleviate the prolonged suffering Megan's family endured while awaiting trial. His belated apology appeared as an additional insult to the grieving mother. No apology could bring back Sarah's daughter or negate Joseph's heinous actions that night. The indifference Trevor displayed in surveillance footage post-incident, showing him nonchalantly leaving Megan's residence, underscored his lack of remorse. The irreversible harm inflicted on Megan and her family robbed them of future joys and milestones, leaving them burdened with lifelong sorrow. Megan's closest friend, Ricardo Eccles, shared that they had plans to shop in Manchester the day after her passing. He was heartbroken upon learning of his friend's sudden loss and spent days in shock. However, in honor of Megan, he gathered himself and initiated a fundraising effort to assist with Newton family's funeral costs. His efforts successfully raised several thousand British pounds, which were handed over to Megan's mother. Megan had always been a pillar of support for those in distress. Now it was time for her supporters to reciprocate, by providing emotional support and assistance to her family and all who cherished her brief yet impactful life. A fervent supporter of Stoke City Football Club, Megan was remembered by the team's players and passionate supporters who dedicated a minute of applause during a game in her honor. Her family and friends also collected funds to set up a commemorative bench in her memory at a serene park in Stoke-on-Trent. This bench overlooks a scenic pond and playground suitable for football, a tribute fitting for someone so interconnected with her community and beloved by all who knew. Welcome to my channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you, the case of Wang Nan. The betrayal of a loved one invariably catches us off guard because we consider people close to us when trust is fully established. With such trust, a stab in the back is unexpected. But what happens if the plan were not fully executed? The victim might be unable to testify due to a serious condition, while the perpetrator frantically tries to cover their tracks without arousing suspicion. It resembles the plot of a thriller, yet, regrettably, this story unfolded a few years ago in real life. This case involved Wang Nan, a pregnant Chinese woman. It became widely known in Thailand. The perpetrator tried to dispose of his wife in a national park and make it appear like a tragic accident. However, nature itself seemed to intervene, saving both the young woman and her child from being killed. When the truth emerged, it shocked not only the detectives on the case, but also the doctors who saved her life. They all believed that her husband was genuinely concerned for his wife and baby. Let's delve deeper into Wang Nan's story. Wang Nan was born in Nanjing, China's former capital and major metropolitan city, in 1987. She grew up in a fairly affluent family where her parents endeavored to provide her with an excellent education and foster the development of her talents and potential. Wang excelled academically, particularly in sciences. After completing school, Wang Nan enrolled at a prestigious university where she pursued studies in business and finance. While mastering several foreign languages during her courses, she also achieved stellar academic records. After receiving her diploma, she secured a position in a prominent travel agency. She swiftly proved herself a valuable, responsible, and highly motivated employee. Her dedication enabled her to climb the career ladder quickly. Before long, she was sent to Thailand to head a new branch and oversee its development. Nan served as a top manager for several years, but decided to leave the travel agency eventually. She pursued her entrepreneurial dreams by opening a Chinese national cuisine restaurant. She managed it so effectively that it grew into a small yet popular chain in Bangkok. Despite nearing 30 years old and living in Thailand for an extended period, Wang didn't let loneliness bother her much. She stayed focused on business and worked tirelessly around the clock. Even though she had learned the local language well enough, she opted to refine her skills further by enrolling in additional courses at a training center. During one of these sessions, Wang met a young man named Yu Xiaodong who couldn't help but stare at her for several minutes before approaching. Speaking native language, they exchanged pleasantries. Yu Xiaodong eventually asked Nan why she was studying this language further. She explained that it was essential for developing her business. Yu then suggested they exchange business cards for future networking opportunities. Although Nan wasn't particularly interested in extending their conversation, out of politeness, she handed him her business card and accepted his in return. His card indicated that Yu Xiaodong operated an export-import business in Bangkok. Wang wasn't particularly impressed and casually tossed the business card into her purse, likely forgetting about it soon after. However, Yu seemed genuinely interested in the young woman and decided to call her the very next day. Nan was busy with work and couldn't spare even a few minutes for a conversation, so she declined his offer to meet for coffee. A few days later, a similar situation occurred, with Nan once again refusing due to her hectic schedule and preparations for an upcoming business conference. She intended to expand her professional network and create new business partnerships there. Yu Xiaodong attended the event with a stunning bouquet of flowers, patiently waiting for an opportunity to approach Nan once she was free. When he did, he asked her out again. This time, Wang Nan was swayed by his persistence. No one had ever tried so hard to gain her attention before. She agreed to meet him for dinner. What followed appeared to be an unforeseen romance. Yu didn't just fall in love with Nan, he seemed utterly captivated by her. He constantly expressed his affection through thoughtful gestures, surprising her with gifts and flowers every morning accompanied by little romantic notes. He also called at least twice daily to wish her good morning and good night. Nan's feelings were mixed. On one hand, she felt annoyed by Yu's persistent attention. On the other hand, she was flattered that someone would go to such lengths to win her over. Unexpectedly, for the first time in a long while, she found herself immersed in a romantic relationship. Yu endeavored not just to court her well, but also aimed for perfection in every aspect of their relationship. He shared many of Wang's interests and viewpoints, learned how to cook her favorite dishes, and sought to make their time together enjoyable by securing tickets to various events. Moreover, he showed readiness to assist with both professional and personal tasks at the first sign of need. Wang Nan could hardly believe her luck. It all felt like something from a movie, but was happening in real life. However, Yu seemed in too much of a hurry. They had only been dating for several months when he began planning their wedding and even thinking up names for potential future children. Wang felt a bit uneasy with this type of. At moments like these, she found herself discussing how they were both in their 30s. At that age, it was natural to start planning for a family and a wedding, even without rings and veils. Nan, unsure of how to act or respond to her suitor's behavior, acknowledged that he was right about their age. Still, she harbored doubts about whether he was the person to marry. After yet another deep, heartfelt discussion where Nan candidly expressed her uncertainties, Yu assured her that he would demonstrate his love that very night. Once home, the man in love sent his girlfriend a lengthy and touching letter filled with tenderness. He confessed his love for her and promised to be the best husband and father to their future children. The next morning, Wang found her suitor standing on her doorstep with a bouquet of flowers. Xiaodong declared that he had never been so serious in his intentions and was ready to marry her immediately. Nan pointed out that the courthouse wouldn't open for another hour and a half. To this, Yu suggested going there right away, stating that if the door was open, they would get married immediately. Wang agreed to this venture, confident that the government office would be closed. To her astonishment, the door was indeed open, and the officer authorized to register marriages was already at his desk. It later became clear that Yu had arranged everything in advance by requesting an early exception for him and his bride. Their wedding proved strange. No guests attended. There were no rings or formal dress. Even memorable photos were absent. Wang Nan couldn't shake off the feeling that nothing about this felt genuine, since she hadn't even introduced her chosen partner to her mother, with whom she had always been very close. As she regained awareness of the situation, she found herself holding a marriage certificate. Next to her stood a satisfied and smiling newlywed husband. In June 2019, a tragic accident occurred when Wang was 3 months pregnant. Her husband persuaded her to arrange a vacation and go on a small trip, reasoning that after the birth of the baby, they would not be able to get out anywhere for a long time. Nan reluctantly agreed, and they chose the Tai National Park Reserve, famous for its picturesque forests and unique rock paintings, the age of which is estimated at tens of thousands of years. However, on the morning of June 9th, tragedy struck. The couple were on one of the observation decks admiring the sunrise, when Wang Nan suddenly fell from a height of 1 feet. When rescuers arrived at the scene, a crying man ran up to them and begged for medics to save his wife and the baby. The man said they were enjoying the first rays of the rising sun when suddenly his wife felt sick. She took a step to the side but became dizzy and fell before he could catch her. The young woman had fallen from a height equivalent to 10 floors. She had several open fractures and the situation seemed hopeless. But then, unexpectedly, Nan groaned and opened her eyes. Her husband immediately stopped crying and wailing. A look of horror appeared on his face. However, he quickly composed himself, expressed immense relief that his beloved was alive by thanking Providence loudly, and then leaned in to whisper something in Chinese into her ear. Before delving into that tragic day's events further, let's rewind 6 months to understand how their family life was unfolding. Wang regretted her marriage almost immediately after it was registered. Initially, she hoped Yu would be a good husband, reliable support, and someone she could rely on. Unfortunately, these hopes were dashed as her new husband revealed his true nature soon after. He spent almost all his time at home playing computer games and willingly used his wife's money without contributing anything to the family budget. When questioned about not working, Xiao Dong replied that his business was in a seasonal lull and claimed he could rest for now. However, this lull extended too long for comfort. Curious about her husband's work claims, the young woman decided to investigate further. That's when she discovered that his so-called successful export-import existed only on paper and printed business cards. At that moment, Wang comprehended the enormity of the mistake she had made. She hadn't even considered drafting a prenup agreement, so now her husband could freely spend what she earned. In case of a divorce, he would claim her property. The couple had a serious conversation during which he cried like a child and assured her that he had temporary difficulties but would definitely improve and find a good job. However, it soon became evident that he wasn't planning to seek employment and felt quite comfortable living off his wife's earnings. He behaved like a child, spending most of his time playing computer games. If he did something around the house or helped his wife at the restaurant, he always asked for money for his own needs. Wang eventually grew tired of this behavior and informed him that she would no longer give him any money until he found a job. Following this confrontation, he disappeared. Along with him went Nan's marriage certificate and identity card, though she only noticed the missing documents in the evening when her accountant called about the transfer of a significant sum from her account. The young woman was shocked because she hadn't authorized any transfer. She quickly suspected who was responsible. The amount involved was more than $500,000, which her husband had moved to his personal account using their marriage certificate, her documents, and assurances that it was their joint money managed together. Wang didn't hesitate to report the theft to the police. The fugitive husband was tracked down within hours as he attempted to withdraw some of the funds at a station. He sobbed again and knelt, begging for his wife's forgiveness. He admitted to losing a large sum gambling and claimed debts threatened his life if not repaid. Additionally, it turned out this wasn't his first run-in with the law. Back in China, he had served 8 years for robbery. Nan nearly burned with shame at this revelation. When she listened to all this, it turned out she did not know the man she married. However, the young woman felt that gambling is a disease and believed she must help her husband overcome this addiction and return to normal life. Wang agreed to pay off half of her husband's debt and made him the manager of one of her restaurants. At first, Yu Xiaodong accepted it gratefully and took on his new position responsibly. He even developed a good strategy for the establishment's growth. But his enthusiasm didn't last long. Soon, he started spending more time playing computer games and seeking out entertainment. Around that time, Wang discovered she was pregnant. She informed her husband, but he reacted strangely and even aggressively. Yu said he wasn't ready for this and persuaded his wife to have an abortion, which she categorically refused. Then, her husband threatened divorce and said he intended to seek a division of property through the court. He didn't speak to his wife for several days, but then suddenly softened and apologized. Yu admitted that he spoke out of emotion and was actually happy about the upcoming addition. He began showing care again by cooking and helping around the house. 2 months later, Wang was absolutely happy because her marriage seemed almost perfect, just as promised by her lover at the beginning of their relationship. He was attentive, caring, fulfilled his job as manager responsibly, and actively prepared their home for the child's arrival. One day, Xiaodong suggested ensuring Wang's life and health because she was pregnant, Such a step would protect both her and the baby in case of various unforeseen situations. The young woman agreed readily and even wondered why she hadn't thought of it before. The insurance was taken out the very next day, and a couple of weeks later, Yu talked about taking a vacation to relax and unwind. Wang was hesitant at first, but her husband insisted they hadn't had a honeymoon yet. With a baby on the way, traveling wouldn't be possible in coming years. He mentioned that they had gone through a difficult period and needed to reset to dispel all the negativity and heavy thoughts. In the end, his arguments proved convincing, so Nan agreed. Her husband chose the place himself, booked the hotel, mapped out the activities, and planned the itineraries meticulously. He ensured the trip would be exciting, but not too exhausting for his pregnant wife. Nan entrusted everything to her husband and was pleased to see how enthusiastic he was about planning their vacation. On June 7th, the couple arrived at the park for the first time and spent most of the day there. They walked a lot and visited numerous beautiful sights and lookouts. That summer Friday evening, the park was teeming with visitors. Towards evening, Wang noticed that her husband was getting visibly angry and nervous. When she asked if everything was all right, he replied that due to the crowd of tourists, they couldn't have privacy or enjoy the sunset in silence. Relenting eventually, Wang Nan decided it would be very romantic as the sun set since fewer people were around. Yu Xiaodong climbed the fence of the observation deck and called his wife to join him at the edge, promising an incredible view. However, Wang refused because it was already dark and could be dangerous. Though initially upset, her husband returned after a few minutes and suggested they come back to meet sunrise at the park. Since they returned to their hotel well past midnight on Friday, they decided to rest on Saturday and head back early Sunday morning as planned. Early Sunday morning on June 9th, they went to admire the rising sun at the national park. Waking up around 3 a.m. while it was still dark outside meant there were hardly any visitors. For a moment, Nan thought they were all alone there. The couple witnessed dawn from one of the observation decks before Yu Xiaodong descended towards a cliff, persuading his wife to join him in admiring rock paintings. Initially hesitant, Nan approached cautiously upon her husband's assurances regarding safety. The view from up there was indeed mesmerizing. Yu Xiaodong hugged his wife, then suddenly asked if she regretted anything in life. Surprised by such an inquiry, but confident nonetheless, Nan responded that she didn't regret anything. Yu Xiaodong gently ran his hand through his wife's hair, kissed her on the cheek, and leaned in close to whisper in her ear, "Die." At that moment, he let go of her and pushed her off the cliff. He his surroundings once more to ensure there were no witnesses. Airing down, he could pinpoint where exactly she had fallen. He listened carefully. There were no screams or cries for help. This confirmed there were no witnesses below either. Yu Xiaodong then calmly made his way toward the park exit, intending to report the incident later when Wang was surely dead. However, a few hikers who had strayed off the trail discovered Wang's body on the rocks and immediately notified rescuers. By this time, Yu Xiaodong had already left the scents. As several emergency vehicles sped past him with sirens blaring, he quickly realized what was happening and returned to the scene. Upon reaching the site where his wife had fallen, he put on a convincing display of grief. Tears, screams, and desperate pleas for help ensued. Believing his wife was dead, he felt assured that no one would uncover the truth. But during the fall, Wang was caught by tree branches, slowing her descent. She first landed on bushes before rolling onto rocks. This sequence cushioned her fall and saved both her life and that of their unborn child, though she sustained serious injuries. As Yu Xiaodong continued his lamentations about not wanting to live without his beloved wife and child, she unexpectedly opened her eyes and attempted to speak, but couldn't form words. Observers noted the genuine terror on Yu Xiaodong's face, but saw him quickly regain composure as he leaned over her again, hissing in Chinese for her to remain silent if she wished to live. Attempts to finalize his grim intentions failed. Wang suffered severe head trauma, multiple closed and open fractures, numerous lacerations and contusions of soft tissue, and ruptured internal organs, leading to massive blood loss. Additionally, her spine was critically damaged. Doctors feared that even if she survived, she might never walk again. Wong spent several days in a coma, hooked up to life support machines, as medical staff worked tirelessly to save her life. During this time, her husband never left her side, spending both days and nights in her room. The doctors praised his dedication and love. However, when Yu Xiaodong was alone with his wife, he contemplated how to end her life without raising suspicion. He examined the medical equipment thoroughly, but couldn't figure out how to disable it discreetly. The horrifying truth and the tragic loss of a child became evident when Wong regained consciousness. Her husband was terrified, not leaving her alone for a moment, fearing she might reveal the truth to the police at any time. When alone with her, he threatened her again, stating he had nothing left to lose. In the initial interrogation, Wong corroborated her husband's story, saying that dizziness caused her fall. Yet a few hours later, when her husband out briefly, she asked a nurse to call the police and ensure he didn't enter her room. That's when she recounted the harrowing story of how he had tried to kill her. Yu Xiaodong stormed into the room, claiming she was delusional due to head trauma and asserting he'd never harm her or their baby. His statement seemed highly unconvincing, and he was taken into custody that same day. He faced multiple charges, including attempted murder and intimidation. When her husband was arrested and jailed awaiting trial, Wong felt a profound relief. Though she faced an extended period of rehabilitation ahead of her, she now felt secure. Initially hopeful that her pregnancy could be saved, since the baby survived the fall from such heights, complications arose. Due to potent painkillers, several surgeries under general anesthesia, and required antibiotics use, doctors recommended an abortion, prioritizing Wong's health, as survival chances for the fetus were minimal due to drug exposure. It was a significant shock for Nan, but she adhered to the doctor's recommendations. Throughout the trial and sentencing, Xiaodong consistently denied his guilt. In prison, he remained calm, hired skilled lawyers, and was confident he would escape punishment, or that it wouldn't be too severe. Investigators and the prosecutor in charge of the case had no doubt that he committed the crime out of interest, hoping to receive a large insurance payout and inherit his wife's fortune, which at that time amounted to almost $2.5 million. However, during one of the interrogations, Xiao shocked everyone by revealing another motive for his inhumane act. It turns out he held resentment towards his wife when she agreed to repay only half of his debt accrued due to a passion for gambling. In his opinion, if his wife truly loved him, she would have settled all his debts because she had the money. He then decided Wong did not love him and felt justified in punishing her for it. After these revelations, Xiao fell silent and claimed he had been misunderstood. But this unexpected confession, coupled with Nan's testimony, was sufficient to send him to prison for a long duration. By March 2021, Xiaodong was found guilty and sentenced to life imprisonment. However, Xiao and his legal team filed several appeals. Just 6 months later, the Thai court demonstrated surprising leniency by reducing the life sentence to just 10 years in prison. Nan and her loved ones were deeply shocked by this decision. They expressed concerns that such leniency could set a dangerous precedent and might encourage others to commit similar horrific acts. Around that same period in Thailand, on Phuket Island, a comparable case took place where a Chinese national drowned his wife while claiming it was a swimming accident on the beach. He also did it for insurance purposes since the murder was proven. Consequently, the man received a death sentence. Xiaodong, on the other hand, was sentenced to just 10 years for the failed murder attempt and for the murder of the fetus. What's Wong Nan's current status? Well, as of now, there's been no final verdict in her case. She's serving her 10-year sentence, and the injured woman is trying to challenge the court's decision in parallel. Yu Xiaodong is also appealing to prove his innocence and secure his release. He stood up for his numerous relatives who claimed he was a wealthy businessman and that Wong married him with selfish motives. However, there's no proof of this. The man has nothing but significant debts. As for Nan, Contrary to doctors' predictions, after several complicated surgeries and lengthy rehabilitation, she managed to get back on her feet. She relearned how to walk. Most of her earnings went towards her recovery. In 2023, she resumed work and revitalized her previously successful business. She has also established and leads an organization to help women who are victims of domestic violence. Additionally, she runs a blog. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Lauren Heike. Life can be unpredictable, filled with both joyous moments and heart-wrenching tragedies. The story of Lauren Heike, 29-year-old from Phoenix, Arizona, serves as a poignant reminder of how fragile our existence can be and how quickly everything can change. Lauren, a beautiful soul with captivating green eyes, had an unwavering faith in the goodness of others. Little did she know that her trust and openness would ultimately lead to her untimely demise. Lauren Heike was born on November 20th, 1993 in Seattle, Washington, into a well-off family. Her father, Jeff, owned a plumbing manufacturing business, and her mother, Lana, worked in real estate. She was very close to her older brother, Ryan. Lauren received her secondary education at Central Kitsap High School in Silverdale, Washington. After graduation, she moved to Phoenix and enrolled at the Gary Manuel Leda Institute, where she studied to become a cosmetologist and skincare specialist. Lauren always took great care of herself and had a good understanding of cosmetics, so her education helped her develop her natural inclinations. She began her career at the age of 18 and built a successful path. Initially, she worked as a customer support representative for 5 years, starting in 2015. Lauren then became a leading manager at the renowned cosmetics company Benefit before working as a cosmetologist at a beauty salon for 9 months in October 2020. She later got a job as a manager at the Center for Aesthetic Medicine. She also planned to follow in her mother's footsteps and try her hand in the real estate field. At the time of the tragedy, Lauren was working full-time as an instructor at a golf club. She was never afraid of difficulties, was responsible, and easily found common ground with people. She was actively developing in the beauty industry, sports, and real estate. Lauren carefully monitored her physical fitness, regularly engaging in fitness activities, and generally led a healthy, active lifestyle. She had many friends and a supportive family. In addition to working in sports and meeting with friends, she adored traveling and hiking. It was because of the presence of picturesque trails that she loved Phoenix so much. Lauren often walked alone, listening to music and enjoying the fresh air, silence, and tranquility of nature. Her favorite route was a path in the northern part of the city, not far from her apartment, where there was almost never anyone around. Understandably, her parents were very concerned about her solitary walks in deserted places, but Lauren herself was convinced that nothing bad could happen to her. According to her family, Lauren had a kind of routine. She would wake up, drink coffee, chat with loved ones and friends, and then go for a walk. She did this every day because she believed that this way she would start the new day with positivity. Unfortunately, she did not realize that her trusting nature and carefree attitude could cause a fatal role. On April 28, 2023, Lauren's morning began as usual. She drank coffee, talked with family and friends on the phone, and went for her usual walk in the northern district of Phoenix, not far from her own apartment. The route passed through a picturesque trail in a calm, quiet, sparsely populated area and took 15 to 30 minutes one way. The girl left the house at approximately 10:30 a.m. The last time surveillance cameras recorded her was at 10:52 when Lauren was calmly walking along the trail in the park. She was wearing a pink sports top, black leggings, and sneakers. She only had her phone and keys with her. No one saw her again. Lauren was supposed to show up for work at 11:30, but did not come and did not warn about her delay or absence. This was uncharacteristic for a very responsible girl. Colleagues started calling her, but to no avail. Lauren's phone was turned off. Worried friends began sending messages on social networks and calling each other, hoping that someone knew where Lauren was. But no one could say anything because no one had seen her after she left the house in the morning. Around 1 p.m., Lauren's parents, unable to reach her, arrived at her apartment hoping their daughter was unwell and had not gone to work. However, Lauren was not home, though her belongings were undisturbed and the doors locked. No signs of a break-in or struggle were evident. It appeared she had gone for a walk and not returned. Concerned, her family promptly contacted the police to report her missing. Law enforcement responded swiftly, but initial searches proved futile. The sunny day of April 28th, typical for the area, saw few visitors at the park where Lauren was last seen walking. Had someone been present during the attack, perhaps the tragedy could have been averted, but fate dictated otherwise. As hours passed with no word from Lauren, anxiety mounted among her loved ones. Despite extensive searches of the park and surrounding areas, no clues surfaced. Hoping she had simply wandered off or was delayed, family and friends reached out in vain. The next morning, April 29th, around 11 a.m., the worst fears were realized when a passerby discovered Lauren's body. The woman promptly contacted the authorities, who found Lauren's body riddled with stab wounds, a short distance from the trail in the undergrowth. She lay face up, arms outstretched, clothes torn, blood everywhere. Forensic experts quickly began their investigation. The medical examiner later determined her death on April 28th around 11 a.m. was due to severe blood loss from 15 deep knife wounds, likely inflicted with a pocket knife. The fatal wound to her back suggested a prolonged attack, evidenced by wounds of varying depth and location on her body. Injuries on her hands indicated a struggle, with deep cuts on both sides as she tried to defend herself from the sharp knife. Despite her resistance, the assailant, aggressive and strong, overpowered her unexpectedly. Scratches on her back and torn clothing suggested a surprise attack from behind, knocking her down and repeatedly stabbing her. A footprint from a size 42 to 43 sneaker at the scene likely belonged to the attacker. Signs of an attempt to escape, crawl away, and hide were visible in the area, but unsuccessful. Traces of blood and remains of a struggle near a barbed wire fence showed her desperate efforts to evade the murderer. Her personal belongings, a phone, and house keys were found nearby. There were no wallet or other valuables on her, so the possibility of robbery was immediately dismissed. Lauren's phone was found to be broken. The last calls were made on the evening of April 27th. As no one had heard from her for over a day, forensic specialists conducted a thorough examination of the territory. They discovered an important detail a few meters from the crime scene. Among the branches lay a bloody pocket knife. Experts immediately suspected this to be the murder weapon. A detailed examination of the blade and handle revealed fingerprints and other DNA traces belonging to an unknown man. Hair and epithelium of the killer were also found at the crime scene. Lauren's body and all physical evidence were promptly sent for examination. Simultaneously, investigators reviewed surveillance camera footage. It was revealed that one of the cameras captured the moment Lauren entered the park at 10:52. She was walking alone, listening to music on her headphones. Nothing suspicious was noted. However, a minute later, the figure of a tall, thin man in dark clothes sprinted past the camera, trying to hide his face. Despite this, experts identified him as a young African-American man in a cap, matching the description of the individual found at the crime scene. Another camera positioned at the park's exit recorded the same man swiftly exiting around the corner at 10:59. He attempted to climb over the fence, but got snagged on his clothes, eventually jumping over and losing his cap. The suspect then disappeared in an unknown direction. These recordings provided the investigation with a crucial lead, offering a detailed description of the person to be located. It's notable that the unknown man's appearance in the park coincided with the time of Lauren's murder. The cameras captured the suspect immediately before and after the crime. A meticulous analysis of the footage showed that the suspect moved purposefully and quickly, appearing vigilant as if afraid of being detected. Secondly, he showed up in the park only 30 to 40 seconds after Lauren, clearly following her. Following the crime, he quickly ran away in the opposite direction from the park's entrance, climbing a fence to disappear rapidly. All of this supports the belief that the murder was planned in advance, indicating it may not have been his first crime. He acted swiftly and boldly, attempting to leave no trace. However, in the panic of the escape, he made some errors that led to him being captured partially on camera. The footage from the cameras was promptly shared with Lauren's relatives, but no one could identify him in the video. The shock and sorrow felt by everyone was palpable. Her relatives couldn't comprehend how someone could brutally take the life of their beloved, gentle girl. Lauren had no enemies, conflicts, valuables, or significant sums of money. Her lifestyle was not hazardous, dispelling notions of revenge or robbery. 1 week after the tragic event, the police held a press conference to share details about the evidence found. They asked the public for help in identifying the suspect. Lauren's father, with tears in his eyes, urged anyone with information to come forward. The family also offered a significant reward for any useful leads. The city was worby Lauren's story, sparking a huge reaction. Social media was full of sharing information, search efforts, and volunteer work. At the same time, forensic investigations continued. DNA, fingerprints, and other biological evidence were carefully examined in the lab. Finally, experts struck gold. The suspect's genetic profile matched records in the police database. The system revealed the name, Zion William Teasley, a 22-year-old African-American with a history of criminality. Detectives swiftly delved into Zion's background, unearthing his challenging upbringing in a home marred by addiction and criminality since his youth. In 2020, he was convicted of a series of armed robberies. Zion spent almost a year in prison but was released early for good behavior. He was last arrested in January 2023 for a knife attack on a passerby. However, the victim then withdrew the statement, so Teasley got off with a suspended sentence. At the time of Lauren's murder, he was under police supervision and had to regularly check in at the precinct. The last such check took place on April 27th, the day before the tragedy in the park. With this new information, the detectives began to develop a plan to detain the suspect. They established round-the-clock surveillance on him and discovered that Zion was not working anywhere at that time, spending all his time at home and occasionally visiting some dubious individuals. Obtaining an arrest warrant, the capture group went to Zion Teasley's apartment. The door had to be broken down, but no one was inside. During the search, the police found a bucket of chlorine, gloves, and rags, indicating an attempt to destroy evidence, though he didn't have enough time for it. In Zion's room, they found a suitcase stuffed with clothes, a brand new passport in a different name, and bus tickets to Canada, suggesting a plan to flee the country. Investigators immediately suspected that Zion had found out about the search and was trying to evade justice. A large-scale special operation began with the focus on Zion Teasley being sent to all states. Border guards were alerted to apprehend the murder suspect. Patrols were deployed at railway stations, airports, and highways. Detectives traced the fugitive's phone calls and located him using signals from cell towers. Meanwhile, they also collected evidence, including witnesses who saw Zion Teasley following Lauren before her murder. A thorough investigation into Zion's history uncovered previous assaults on women, suggesting a history of violence. He was arrested for harassing a girl in a club. Prior to that, a girl he was dating wrote a statement accusing him of beating her. Although the case was closed due to lack of evidence, Zion was widely regarded as an extremely aggressive and unbalanced person who held contempt for women, considering them inferior. His social media posts were filled with derogatory language towards women, and there were also photos of knives resembling the murder weapon. Police suggested that Lauren might have been a random victim of Zion's violent tendencies. It was theorized that he spotted her on the street, stalked her, and then attacked her in a deserted place. Some speculated that he may have felt provoked by her attractiveness and apparent vulnerability, a common trigger for individuals with his mindset. Lauren's family, devastated by her senseless death, implored the public to eschew vigilante justice and allow the legal system to handle the case. After a 3-day search, Zion Teasley was apprehended in an abandoned garage on the city's outskirts. During his arrest, he resisted and injured a police officer. Subsequently, during questioning, he adamantly denied any involvement in the crime. However, when presented with surveillance footage from the park, he fell silent and requested legal representation. The prosecution swiftly charged Zion Teasley with intentional murder and kidnapping, citing substantial evidence such as video recordings, Lauren's belongings found in the garage, a knife, and DNA and fingerprints found at the crime scene. As a result, the court ordered that he be held in custody without the option for bail. The trial of Zion Teasley began on June 5, 2023, a highly publicized case in the state's history, capturing the attention of the entire nation. Journalists, activists, and concerned citizens gathered outside the courthouse, eager to observe the accused individual. Accompanied by tight security, Zion entered the courtroom in handcuffs, wearing an orange prison outfit, seemingly indifferent. Lauren's family openly displayed their emotions. Her mother wept continuously, while her father glared angrily at the defendant. Friends of the victim, holding her pictures, also attended the proceedings. The prosecutor argued that Zion Teasley was a dangerous and calculated killer who posed a significant danger to society. He emphasized the audacious nature of the crime and the strong evidence against the defendant, portraying Zion as a misogynistic psychopath who took pleasure in causing harm to women. In contrast, Zion's lawyer sought to prove his client's innocence, questioning the presented evidence and suggesting the involvement of another individual in Lauren's death. The defense attorney advised the jury to make their decision based on facts rather than emotions or public opinion, highlighting Zion's difficult upbringing and the harsh treatment he endured in his family. Zion William Teasley currently faces charges of first-degree murder. In December 2023, the Maricopa County Prosecutor's Office pushed for the death penalty, the harshest punishment allowed by Arizona state law for such a serious crime. The Phoenix Police Department concluded their investigation into the case, with the suspect now awaiting trial. There is no information that would indicate that the attack on Lauren Ha was anything other than a random choice of a victim by the perpetrator. Zion Teasley himself does not admit his guilt in committing this brutal murder. He continues to be held in custody without the right to post bail. The trial of the accused is scheduled for October 2025. It is expected that this will be one of the most resonant trials in the history of the state of Arizona. The tragic death of Lauren Heike shook all of America and became a real shock for her family and friends. She, who loved life so much and believed in the goodness of people, became a victim of a cruel and senseless crime. This murder once again reminded society of the importance of public safety and timely response to alarming signals about the inadequate behavior of certain individuals. This story also showed how important the work of law enforcement agencies is, as they were able to promptly find and detain the suspect and gather the necessary evidence of his guilt. Ahead is the judicial review of this case, which should put the final point and determine the measure of responsibility of the murderer. Society hopes that justice will be fair and that the criminal will receive the most severe punishment. Most importantly, the memory of Lauren Heike should live in the hearts of all who knew and loved her. This girl will forever remain young, beautiful, kind, and sincere. Let her story be a warning to everyone. Value life, be careful, and do not. Welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you, the case of Chris Coleman. On May 5, 2009, the Coleman family, who appeared to have the perfect life, was tragically murdered in their home just before 3 a.m. Let's examine the events of that night, a crime that left a lasting impact on many. Chris Coleman met his future wife, Sherry, while they were both serving in the military. For Sherry, it was love at first sight, and she knew immediately that Chris was the one she wanted to spend the rest of her life with. Within a few months of meeting, Sherry became pregnant with their first child, Garrett. As devout Christians, the couple married before Garrett was born. After Garrett's birth, Chris and Sherry had their second son, Gavin. Gavin was a lively child, whereas Garrett was more laid back, like his father. Both boys had lively personalities and were well behaved. Sherry was a devoted mother who would do anything to protect her sons. Chris was an excellent father, and the family enjoyed quality time together, laughing, playing, and cherishing every moment with their children. After leaving the military, the Colemans moved to Waterloo, Illinois, a small town, where they bought a house in an upscale neighborhood, courtesy of Chris's new job. Chris became the head of security for Joyce Meyer, a renowned TV evangelist and CEO of one of the world's largest Christian ministries. However, controversy arose due to Joyce's multi-million-dollar income and opulent lifestyle, which sparked criticism from some individuals. They accused her of being a greedy con artist who exploited her followers' fears, arguing that her financial success and lavish lifestyle conflicted with her religious teachings. As Joyce's bodyguard and personal security guard, Chris was responsible for monitoring and protecting her from hate mail and letters sent to her church, which often contained threats against her life, with people expressing their intentions to harm her. Chris earned a substantial salary of $100,000 per year working for Joyce's ministry in St. Louis, Missouri, providing financial stability for his family. As part of his job as a bodyguard, Chris frequently accompanied Joyce on international trips, ensuring his safety while abroad. However, this arrangement meant Chris was away from home for extended periods, affecting his family life. One year, Chris was gone for 260 days, which took a toll on his family, especially his sons, Garrett and Gavin. The boys missed their father and would mark off each day on a calendar, eagerly waiting for his return. However, shortly after Chris came home, he would have to leave again, causing tension in his marriage to Sherry. Sherry felt overwhelmed, shouldering the responsibilities of both parents and underappreciated for managing the household alone. The constant cycle of Chris's absence strained their relationship. In October 2008, Chris visited Tampa, Florida, where his friend Sherry had gone to high school. Sherry got in touch with her old friend Tara Lintz and asked her to look out for Chris while he was in town. After settling in, Chris contacted Tara and they agreed to meet up. Tara kindly showed Chris around the city. On November 14, 2008, at around 11 p.m., Chris received a disturbing email. The sender's email address was destroychris@gmail.com, and the subject line and content terrified him. The email warned Chris to stop working for Joyce Meyer, otherwise he or his family would be killed. Over the next few hours, more threatening emails arrived at the ministry from the same sender, repeating the threat and specifying a time and date when the attack on his family might happen. The sender seemed to know Chris's schedule and was aware that he would soon be traveling out of the country. Chris told Sherry about the threatening emails he'd been getting, and on the following Monday, he went to the local police station to report them. He explained that he'd been away from home a lot lately because he'd been traveling with Joyce Meyer Ministries. The police offered to increase their patrols around the house when Chris was away, but even with the extra police presence, Sherry was still afraid for her family's safety. Sherry was so scared that she once asked a friend to stay with her because she didn't feel safe staying alone in the house when Chris was away. She made it clear that she would do whatever it took to keep her family safe. To prove how serious she was, Sherry showed her friend that she had a gun and demonstrated how to hold it, just in case someone broke into the house while Chris was away and she wasn't there. 2 months after the death threats started, a mysterious hand-delivered letter arrived in the Coleman's mailbox. The letter was written in bold letters and was very demanding. It said, "Deny your God publicly or else. No more opportunities. Time is running out for you and your family." This threat was very ominous and specific, stating that if the Colemans didn't do what the writer wanted, they would face severe consequences. Sherry was deeply shaken by the disturbing message. The fact that someone had invaded her private space and threatened her and her family made her feel genuinely terrified throughout the ordeal. Sherry's fear grew more intense by the day. The letter she received was a constant reminder of the potential danger that lurked in the shadows, waiting to pounce. After getting a death threat in the mail, Sherry and her husband Chris decided to take extra measures to protect their family. As part of their safety plan, Chris installed surveillance cameras around their home. These cameras recorded the surroundings and sent the footage to a screen in their basement office. The footage was also saved on a digital video recorder, allowing Chris to keep a permanent record of any incidents. He hoped the cameras would help him identify the person behind the threats against their family. After the cameras were installed, the threats against the Colemans stopped. Life returned to normal for Chris, Sherry, and their sons, Garrett and Gavin. For a while, everything seemed fine. In April 2009, Sherry confided in others that she was feeling more optimistic about her marriage and was determined to make it work. She was relieved the death threats had stopped and felt a sense of happiness. However, Sherry's optimism was short-lived. A second ominous letter arrived at the Coleman home, warning her that her worst fears were about to become a reality. Chris, her husband, was unsettled by the letter's contents and decided to review the previous night's footage from their security camera. What he saw shocked him. A mysterious silhouette caught his attention, but its identity remained unclear. This new discovery reignited Sherry's fear for her own and her children's safety, plunging her back into a state of constant unease. The brief sense of security she had felt was now gone, replaced by the feeling that her worst nightmare was closing in. The local police boosted their efforts due to the rising threats against the Coleman family. A neighbor, Detective Sergeant Justin Barlow from the Columbia Police Department, took a keen interest in the case. Detective Barlow personally called Chris to discuss the situation. During their conversation, Detective Barlow mentioned that he had noticed Chris's recent work absences from home. He offered help, providing his cell phone number in case Chris needed anything or had concerns. Detective Barlow reassured Chris that he could respond faster in an emergency than the regular police. Detective Justin Barlow lived across the street from the Coleman family, so he set up video cameras to monitor their driveway over several weeks. Although the cameras captured footage of the Colemans going about their daily routines, they did not capture the person responsible for leaving the death threats. Despite his efforts, the videos did not provide any clues or information about the identity of the person behind the threatening messages. On May 5, 2009, Chris went to the gym at 5:45 a.m. After leaving his house around 5:30 a.m., he called his home phone at 6:45 a.m. to check if his wife Sherry and their sons were up and getting ready for school. When no one answered, Chris became worried and called his neighbor, Detective Justin Barlow, at 6:45 a.m. to ask for his help. Chris explained to Detective Barlow that he had been trying to reach Sherry while he was at the gym, but she wasn't picking up. This made Chris increasingly concerned, so he asked Detective Barlow to check on Sherry and the boys. Detective Barlow prepared himself by grabbing his essential items, including his weapon, handcuffs, flashlight, and radio, before heading to the Coleman residence. While waiting for backup to arrive, his main goal was to make contact with Sherry and ensure everything was okay. With a mix of anticipation and apprehension, Detective Barlow approached the door and knocked firmly, hoping to get a response. However, the silence that followed made him feel uneasy. The lights inside the house were off, and there was no sign of movement, which only added to his bad feeling. Within minutes of Detective Justin Barlow's arrival at the Coleman home, a patrol vehicle pulled up with an additional officer to assist him. The second officer was sent to the rear of the house to try to see through a door or window, or establish contact with Sherry or the boys at the back of the house. But as soon as the officer reached the back, he found signs of forced entry into the basement. This discovery immediately grabbed Detective Barlow's attention, and he began to suspect that someone inside the house was in danger. Detective Barlow was deeply concerned for the safety of Sherry, Garrett, and Gavin after discovering the signs of forced entry into the Coleman home. Detective Barlow and the second officer decided to enter the premises through the basement. They announced their presence, but received no response. As they thoroughly searched the basement, they found a disconnected video cable at the computer desk. This led them to conclude that the camera's digital video recorder had been taken. Detective Justin Barlow and another officer made their way up from the basement of the Coleman home, ascending the stairs to the main level. As they climbed, they noticed an increasingly strong smell of aerosol spray paint. Once they reached the top, they saw that the wall had been spray painted with derogatory messages targeting Chris, Sherry, and their sons. 13 minutes after Chris phoned Detective Justin Barlow, Chris returned home from the gym. The detective told him to wait outside while they searched the house. Chris complied, sitting quietly on the porch without asking questions or trying to enter. Meanwhile, a third officer arrived at the Coleman residence. The three officers knew they had to search the rest of the house for Sherry and her sons. As they went upstairs, they found more hate-filled messages spray-painted on the walls when they reached the second story of the Coleman home. Detective Justin Barlow entered Garrett's bedroom, the oldest son's room, and initially thought he was asleep. But when he got closer, the detective realized Garrett was dead. There were no signs of life, and his body was cold to the touch. Ligature marks around his neck indicated the young boy had been murdered by strangulation. The discovery of Garrett's lifeless body shocked Detective Barlow. In the next room, the second officer found Gavin, but to his horror, the boy was also dead, just like his brother. Gavin also had ligature marks around his neck, indicating he had been strangled. The killer had even spray-painted an obscene message on the bed sheets, making the scene even more horrific. The third officer entered the master bedroom, where he was met with a deeply disturbing scene. Sherry, like her sons, was lying lifeless across the bed, her hair scattered over her face, hiding her features. It was obvious to the officer that Sherry had been brutally murdered. As he surveyed the room, he noticed multiple bruises on Sherry's body, suggesting that she had fiercely resisted her attacker, fighting to defend herself and her sons. After Detective Justin Barlow and the officers discovered the lifeless bodies of Sherry, Garrett, and Gavin, Chris entered the house, having waited outside for news about his family. Unaware of the gravity of the situation, Chris announced his presence. Detective Barlow then had the heartbreaking task of informing Chris that his entire family had been murdered. This devastating news crushed Chris, leaving him reeling. To give Chris some privacy to process the information, Detective Barlow accompanied him outside. However, as the reality of the situation set in, Chris's reaction was overwhelming. He became nauseous, and his body seemed to weaken. Overcome with grief, Chris curled up in a fetal position, unable to contain the torrent of emotions. The shock of the tragedy was too much for him to absorb. Chris couldn't comprehend the brutal way his family had been taken from him. In desperation, Chris reached out to his father, Ronald, and informed him that something had happened to Sherry and the boys. Ronald immediately realized Chris was in shock upon receiving the news. Ronald was equally stunned, unable to believe that this tragedy had befallen his family. News of the shocking murders of Sherry, Garrett, and Gavin Coleman spread swiftly throughout Waterloo, Illinois, where the family lived. As the community awoke to the grim news, neighbors were left devastated and terrified. The Coleman family had always been perceived as the epitome of a perfect American family, with their charming sons, Garrett and Gavin, admired by everyone. In fact, one neighbor went so far as to say that everyone would want their children to be like Garrett and Gavin, who were always polite, helpful, and kind-hearted. For Sherry's brother and mother, the harsh reality of the brutal crime was impossible to accept. Chris Coleman, the husband and father, was taken to a nearby police station for questioning after his wife and 2 sons were discovered murdered. During the interrogation, Detective Justin Barlow asked Chris if he could shed any light on the killings. Chris expressed deep regret for leaving to go to the gym, leaving Sherry and the boys alone in the home. When Detective Barlow asked Chris if he had any idea who could have committed the murders, Chris claimed he had no idea. However, several aspects of Chris's behavior during the interview raised suspicions with the detective. One of the detective's initial concerns was Chris's lack of curiosity about the circumstances surrounding his wife and son's murder. Given the gravity of the situation, it seemed odd that Chris didn't ask questions about their deaths. Instead, he appeared uninterested in finding out the details. Additionally, the detective noticed that Chris tried to conceal scratches on his arms during the interview. He asked for a blanket, despite the warm room temperature, to hide the injuries. These scratches raised suspicions as the detective knew that Sherry, Chris's wife, had fought for her life. When questioned about the scratches, Chris claimed they resulted from installing a satellite dish the day before. During the police interview, Chris denied having an affair outside of his marriage. However, he admitted to having a close friendship with Tara, a cocktail waitress and high school friend of his wife's who lived in Florida. Chris claimed that his wife wouldn't have approved of their conversations, but he maintained that he had no intention of leaving his wife for Tara. He insisted that he would never consider betraying his family in such a way. A different story unfolded when detectives contacted Tara in Florida. Tara claimed that her relationship with Chris went beyond friendship, alleging a full-blown affair that started in November 2008. She handed over her phone and laptop to the police, which contained convincing evidence of their romance, including emails, explicit photos, and videos they had exchanged. When confronted with Tara's information, Chris confessed to seeing her more frequently than he initially admitted. Further investigation revealed that Chris and Tara had devised a secret meeting system, often coinciding with his work trips for Joyce Meyer. They would secretly meet at these locations, sometimes traveling to exotic destinations like Hawaii to spend time together away from their families. Chris claimed his relationship with Tara wasn't an affair, defining an affair as involving a deeper level of commitment and involvement than they had. However, detectives found contradictory evidence on Tara's phone and computer, including a calendar marked with a wedding to Chris and scheduled vacations, suggesting she believed he would leave his family for her. This evidence raised suspicions, contradicting Chris's assertion that their relationship was casual. Chris's father, Ronald, was shocked by the revelation, but insisted that the affair had no connection to the murders of Chris's wife and son. He described Chris as gentle and non-violent, emphasizing that he showed no signs of aggression. Detectives suspected Chris's affair with Tara was a strong motive for the murders, but their initial investigation found insufficient evidence to press charges. After 6 hours of questioning, Chris was released without charges. Tara was identified as a person of interest in the murders of Sherry Garrett and Gavin. However, detectives cleared her as a suspect after determining she was in Florida on the morning of May 5, 2009, when the family was killed. The Coleman family murders led to one of the largest murder investigations in Illinois history. A task force of 25 detectives was formed to catch the killer. For 15 consecutive days, they worked 20-hour shifts, bringing in experts to assist with the case. A key focus of the task force was tracing the source of the hate-filled emails sent to Chris Coleman. Every threatening email received by Joyce Meyer Ministries in the past year was carefully analyzed, leading the team to locations across the country. Each person who emailed Joyce Meyer was tracked down and interviewed, but none of the individuals who sent those threats seemed to be responsible for the Coleman family's murder. A computer forensic team was called in to investigate the murders of Sherry, Garrett, and Gavin. The detectives wanted to find any digital clues related to the crime, so they began by analyzing the email account, diarist@gmail.com. Their analysis revealed that the email address was created on November 14, 2008, just days before the first email was sent. One of the most significant discoveries made by the team was that the death threat sent to Chris Coleman's family had originated from the same IP address associated with Chris himself. The detectives continued their investigation into the Coleman family's murder by conducting a thorough examination of both the spray-painted messages found at the crime scene and Christopher Coleman's handwriting to gather evidence. They took photographs of the spray-painted messages at the crime scene and collected samples of Christopher Coleman's handwriting. These samples were then sent to a handwriting expert for analysis. After comparing the two samples, the expert concluded that the handwriting matched the spray-painted messages. This finding led the detectives to conclude that Christopher Coleman was the one who wrote the messages on the walls of his home on the day of the murders. A chemical analysis of the spray paint used at the crime scene identified the brand and color as Rust-Oleum Candy Apple Red. Investigators learned that Chris Coleman had bought this exact product at a local hardware store just days before his family was killed. One detective contacted the store manager, who confirmed the purchase and identified the specific product as Rust-Oleum Candy Apple Red spray paint. This crucial discovery linked Chris Coleman to the same type of spray paint found at the murder scene. During the investigation into the Coleman family's murder, the time of death became a crucial factor. Initially, Chris claimed to have left his home around 5:45 a.m. on May 5, 2009, the morning his family was killed. However, the medical examiner's report showed that Sherry, Garrett, and Gavin were killed around 3 a.m., indicating that Chris was at home when his family was murdered. 2 weeks after the bodies were discovered, Chris Coleman was arrested and charged with 3 counts of first-degree murder. The prosecution's argument was that the murders were motivated by greed, selfishness, and narcissism, and that Chris had decided to eliminate his family to start anew. In April 2011, Chris Coleman's trial began, with the state accusing him of murdering his wife, Sherry, and their 2 sons, Garrett and Gavin. The prosecution's case was that Chris had killed his family because he wanted to be with Tara Lynn, but couldn't divorce his wife due to the potential loss of his well-paying job with Joyce Meyer Ministries, which did not condone divorce. Conversely, Chris's defense attorney argued that Chris was innocent and that an intruder had entered the home on May 5, 2009, and committed the murders. Exactly 2 years after the devastating murders of Sherry, Garrett, and Gavin, Chris Coleman was finally found guilty of the heinous crime. Although eligible for the death penalty, the judge instead sentenced Chris to life imprisonment without parole. This verdict was influenced by the state of Illinois' recent repeal of the death penalty, which was set to take effect just months after the tragic incident. Sherry's loved ones and friends were resolute in keeping her, Garrett, and Gavin's memories alive and sought to do something meaningful to honor them. They decided to raise funds for victims of domestic violence, a cause that channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you, the case of Chad Dorman. Chad Dorman, a 32-year-old resident of Claremont County, Ohio, was married to 34-year-old Laura. Together, they had a blended family consisting of Laura's 16-year-old teenage daughter, Alexis, from a previous relationship, and their 3 young sons, Hunter, Clayton, and Chase, aged 3, 4, and 7, respectively. The 3 boys were inseparable, shared a love for sports, and were known for their humorous and affectionate nature. Laura was a stay-at-home mom, while Chad worked to provide for the family. They resided in a modest 3-bedroom, 2-bathroom house in New Richmond, a small town of approximately 2,000 people situated along the Ohio River in Claremont County. Until tragedy struck, they lived an ordinary and unassuming life. On June 15, 2023, Chad returned home from work earlier than usual and decided to take a nap with his family. He invited his wife Laura and their 3 sons to join him in their bedroom, where they all sat together, laughing and chatting. Unbeknownst to Laura, this loving moment was about to turn into a nightmare. After a few minutes, Chad got up and opened the gun safe beside their bed, loaded the Marlin Model HC-22 rifle, and shot his 4-year-old son Hunter twice. Meanwhile, their daughter Alexis was watching TV in the family room when she heard the gunshot. She rushed to the bedroom and witnessed the horrific scene of her brother being shot as she reached the doorway. Terrified, Alexis turned and ran as fast as she could. Laura, who was with her children, rushed to help her child Hunter. She then yelled at the other kids to flee and save themselves. Alexis saw the oldest boy running out the wrong door towards a field and shouted at him to keep going. Chad followed him, and moments later, he shot his 7-year-old son Clayton. After Clayton fell to the ground, bleeding badly, Chad stood next to him, seemingly triumphant. Alexis witnessed the entire scene, horrified. She then ran into the house, grabbed her youngest brother, and escaped to safety, desperate to protect their lives. Chad chased after Alexis and caught up to her, raising his gun and ordering her to put down the 3-year-old Chase. Alexis wept and begged Chad not to shoot her, pleading with him to stop. Chad attempted to shoot her in the head, but luckily he had just run out of bullets. Alexis fled to the nearby fire station, where she stopped a passing woman and urgently told her that her stepfather had killed her entire family. She then called 911 at 4:15 p.m. She was running down the street, saying her stepfather had killed everyone in her family. She called 911 and explained that she said her stepfather was killing everybody in her house. The 911 operator asked if she could tell how many people had been shot. She replied that she thought it was 2 children. Meanwhile, 3-year-old Chase was reunited with his mother. However, a heated argument erupted between Chad and Laura over custody of Chase. Chad attempted to wrestle Chase away from Laura, but she clung to him desperately, trying to shield him from harm. In a shocking turn of events, Chad bit Laura and then pressed the gun to her thumb, firing it. Severely wounded, Laura released her grip on Chase. Chad then callously shot Chase in the head. Afterwards, he coldly arranged the lifeless bodies of all 3 children in a straight line. Having committed the atrocities, Chad sat calmly on his front porch, feigning nonchalance, while Laura lay inside the house, screaming for help. Following the 911 call, police officers arrived at the scene at 4:25 p.m. When they arrived, they found Chad sitting on his porch, a rifle beside him. The officers promptly apprehended him and put him in handcuffs. Chad displayed a calm demeanor and offered no resistance. While one officer restrained him, another tended to the 3 victims. Despite their efforts, paramedics were unable to save the children, who succumbed to their gunshot wounds. Laura was subsequently rushed to the University of Cincinnati Medical Center to receive treatment for her injuries. Chad Derman's stepdaughter, Alexis, was fortunate to have escaped the tragic events alive. On June 15, 2023, she managed to flee the house, the same day Chad killed his 3 sons. The police arrested him at 4:27 p.m. When officers apprehended him, he displayed a surprising calmness and politeness, as if nothing out of the ordinary had occurred. Subsequently, he was taken into custody for further questioning and investigation. During the interrogation, Chad Derman confessed to the police that he had been planning the murders since October 2022. He also revealed to the investigators that he had gone without sleep for 3 to 4 days, overwhelmed by the unbearable thought of killing his own sons. These confessions provided a disturbing insight into his state of mind in the lead-up to the tragic events. The investigation continued, focusing on whether Chad had a history of violent behavior. To this end, investigators examined his phone records, which showed that he had mainly been cited for traffic violations in Claremont County, with one exception, an incident when he was 18 involving criminal damage. Furthermore, they discovered a domestic violence case from 2010 in which Chad was accused of choking his father Keith Derman. However, the case was eventually dropped when Keith Derman failed to appear in court to testify for the prosecution. These records provided valuable insight into Chad's legal history and his past interactions with law enforcement in the county. During the investigation, a neighbor, Richard Van Kanen, shared his observations with a news channel, stating that Chad was consistently angry, yelling at his wife and kids, and belittling them. The woman who had called 911 also gave an interview to the news channel, describing how she had been running with her little black lab, screaming for someone to call 911 because her stepfather was shooting everyone in her household. Investigators looked into whether Derman was experiencing financial difficulties. They discovered that he had bought a converted manufactured home on a 3-acre property in 2016 for $75,000 and had been paying his property taxes up to 2023, suggesting that he wasn't having trouble with his mortgage payments. Detectives also spoke with Keith Derman, Chad's 59-year-old father. He was in a state of complete shock upon learning what his son had done and couldn't fathom how his child could commit such a heinous act. The father revealed that Chad had been dealing with some personal issue that had become too much for him to handle and that he might have kept many things hidden from him. Keith Derman tearfully described Chad as a good kid, expressing deep distress over the situation. On June 23, 2023, Chad initially entered a guilty plea and confessed to his crimes during the first court hearing. However, in a surprising turn of events, he later maintained his innocence and pleaded not guilty to the charges against him during the subsequent court hearing on the same day. The judge described the case as an evil horror that was impossible to process and incomprehensible cruelty. The tragic events unfolded when the father, who stood before the court, brutally executed his 3 young sons, aged 3, 4, and 7, in his own home using a rifle. David Gast, chief prosecutor of the municipal court in Clermont County, revealed shocking details about the case, stating that Chad had meticulously planned the events. Chad's son had attempted to escape in a nearby field, but Chad chased, caught, and returned him to the yard, where he was brutally killed along with his brothers. According to Gast, the trauma inflicted by Chad on his family, community, law enforcement, and first responders is unimaginable. The prosecutor emphasized that Chad's admission of guilt in this case has left them grappling with the sheer horror of his actions. He described Chad's killing of his sons as one of the most heinous, craven, and cowardly acts they will ever encounter. The Bill of Particulars, filed in Clermont County, revealed the full extent of the crime. Gast explained that Chad deliberately lined up the boys and shot them, confirming that Chad himself admitted to planning the killings. When the mother intervened, she was shot in the hand. The prosecutor disclosed that Chad fired 9 shots, causing catastrophic harm, with one boy hit once and the other 2 each shot 4 times. The prosecutor, Mark Talvey, described to the judge the cruel manner in which Chad Dorman murdered his 3 sons, leaving the family and community in shock. Chad confessed to the crime, stating that he had done it and should be taken to jail, expressing regret and acknowledging that he shouldn't have shot them. Talvey emphasized that he would push for the death penalty for Chad Dorman. Initially, Chad faced 21 charges related to the tragic events that occurred on June 15, 2023. Specifically, he was accused of shooting and killing his 3 young children, 4-year-old Hunter, 7-year-old Clayton, and 3-year-old Chase, in an execution-style manner. The grand jury has now indicted Chad on 21 counts, including 9 counts of aggravated murder, 8 counts of kidnapping, and 4 counts of felony assault, which could lead to the death penalty if convicted. Clermont County Municipal Court Judge Jason Nagel ruled that Chad Dorman should be held in the Clermont County Jail and set his bail at a record-breaking $20 million. During a subsequent court hearing, Dorman's lawyer requested that the death penalty be removed from consideration, arguing that Dorman was severely mentally ill when he fatally shot his 3 sons on June 15, 2023. Dorman has since pleaded not guilty by reason of insanity nearly 9 months after the incident. The Claremont County prosecutors allege that Dorman deliberately killed his 3 young sons. Experts will reassess Dorman's mental state at the time of the murders. Dorman's lawyer maintains that executing someone with severe mental illness is cruel and unusual punishment, violating both the Ohio and U.S. constitutions. Those suffering from severe mental illness at the time of the alleged offense are not as morally responsible as others. The prosecution has requested a mental evaluation, and a court date was set for May 3, 2024, to discuss the lawyer's request. Chad's lawyers had agreed to provide a report from a mental health expert by June 3, 2024, to support their claim that he was mentally ill when the crime occurred. During a March 2024 court hearing, Chad's lawyers contended that the Claremont County Sheriff's deputies failed to uphold his Miranda rights following his arrest. The judge has subsequently ruled that Chad Dorman's confession, allegedly given during his interrogation, will be dismissed this Friday. The judge's decision was based on the grounds that the defendant's rights were violated on 2 separate occasions. Firstly, when police omitted parts of the Miranda warnings, and secondly, when detectives continued questioning Chad Dorman after he requested an attorney. The prosecution called several witnesses, including police officers who responded to the scene, to describe their encounters with Chad. According to prosecutors, almost all of Chad's interactions with the sheriff's deputies and detectives were recorded. The first witness to testify in court was Claremont County Deputy Chad P. Mann, a K-9 handler deputy. Deputy P. Mann stated that he was the first officer to arrive at the scene, and the first thing he noticed was the defendant sitting on the porch near a rifle. After a lengthy court hearing, Judge Richard Fank ruled that the investigators failed to follow proper procedure during Chad's arrest in June 2023, violating his Miranda rights. Chad's lawyers argued that he requested a lawyer at least twice during his 3-hour interrogation, but detectives ignored his requests and continued questioning him. They also claimed that Chad's initial guilty plea was a result of pressure from investigators. The judge's decision stated that the detectives did not fully inform Chad of his rights before the interrogation, making any statements he made during that time inadmissible in future court proceedings. This ruling significantly impacted the trial, limiting the evidence that could be presented against Chad and adding complexity to the legal process, which has heightened public interest in the case. If convicted, Chad faces the death penalty, with his trial set to begin in July. However, this recent ruling may alter the course of the trial. A final court hearing is scheduled for June 14th, just before the anniversary of the incident, and the trial is expected to take place from July 8th to August 2nd, 2024. The motive behind Chad's actions remains unknown. Speculation suggests that he may have been motivated by a belief that his 34-year-old wife was cheating on him, but this is unconfirmed. Earlier, hundreds attended a fundraiser for the victim's family, which the community sees as the least they can do to support them while the boy's father awaits trial for their murders. A memorial service was held on June 26th at First Baptist Church of Glen Estee to honor the 3 boys. At the family's request, community members wore bright colors. The community is still grappling with the tragedy of the shootings and the loss of 3 innocent lives. Outpourings of support for the family, friends, classmates, and first responders continue to grow, showing no signs of slowing. Horrible case with you. The case of Kathy Martin. Kathy Martin was born on October 25, 1959, in Houston, Texas, and grew up in a loving family where she was especially close to her sister. In high school, she met Mike, and a few years later, they tied the knot. The couple settled in a quiet Houston suburb where they soon started a family with the birth of their daughter. 3 years later, Kathy became pregnant again, and in early 1987, they welcomed a son. At just 27 years old, Kathy was now a mother of 2. After her second child was born, Kathy dedicated herself to full-time motherhood, focusing on raising her children. Mike worked at his father-in-law's small sign factory, providing a stable income for the family. Kathy's parents also offered financial support, enabling her to devote all her time to the kids. On March 3, 1987, Kathy was at home with the children as usual, while Mike was at work. After his shift ended, he decided to meet up with friends and headed to a bar. Mike attempted to call his wife from a payphone, but she didn't answer, a rare occurrence, as Kathy rarely had the chance to leave the house even for a few minutes. Mike tried calling her several more times, but still got no response. Worried, Mike called their neighbor, Tim, and asked him to check on Kathy. Tim went to their house and knocked on the door, but received no answer. Peering through the living room window, he noticed the TV was on, so he persisted in knocking, but there was only silence. Tim's concern grew that something might have happened to Kathy. Rather than returning home to call Mike or the police, he got in his car and drove around town searching for patrol officers. After a few minutes of driving, he spotted a police car and explained the situation to the officers, requesting they check on Kathy. When the police arrived at the house and received no response to their knock, they tried the door handle and found it unlocked. Upon entering the house, they immediately found Kathy's daughter lying on the living room sofa, unconscious and displaying visible signs of trauma, but still alive. The officers quickly called for an ambulance and continued to inspect the other rooms. In the bedroom, the officers found the younger child in his crib, safe and unharmed. However, in another room, they were met with a gruesome scene. Kathy lay on the floor, bloodied and lifeless. She was naked, and the police quickly determined that she was the victim of a heinous crime. Her hands were bound with a lamp cord, a disturbing indicator of the brutality she had endured. The paramedics rushed Kathy's daughter to the hospital, and the investigators began meticulously examining the crime scene. Kathy's father arrived shortly after, but the police withheld the details of the tragedy from him. Instead, they requested that he go to the hospital to be with his granddaughter when she awoke. As Kathy's father waited at the hospital, he was shocked to learn about his daughter's murder from a news report on TV. Meanwhile, Mike arrived at the house, and the police were immediately struck by his suspicious behavior. Not only did he show up late, but there were also telltale bloodstains on his shirt. The police asked him to surrender his clothes and answer their questions, their scrutiny intensifying with each passing moment. Investigators made several intriguing discoveries. Firstly, they found numerous bloodstains in the bathroom, indicating that the perpetrator had attempted to clean up the crime scene. This suggested that the attacker had lingered in the house for some time rather than fleeing immediately after the murder. Secondly, forensic experts detected no signs of forced entry. All windows and doors, except the front door, were locked, implying that Kathy either let the attacker in voluntarily or they had a key. The police also observed another peculiar detail. All of Kathy's clothes were neatly folded on the floor beside her body. This not only hinted at the possibility of sexual assault, but also seemed strange that the attacker had taken the time to further. This led the detectives to probe the suspect's whereabouts long before the evening and their actions after the murder. Both Mike and Tim claimed to have been at work, prompting the police to verify their alibis. 2 days after the murder, the hospital contacted the detectives with a breakthrough. Kathy's daughter had suddenly regained consciousness, and her life was no longer in danger. Investigators rushed to interview her, hoping she could provide insight into the events, but the 4-year-old girl had almost completely lost her memory of that day. She vaguely recalled a man with light hair entering their house, though both her father and Tim had dark hair. The detectives received an unexpected update from the lab, forcing them to reassess the case. The experts' analysis revealed that the stains on the neighbor's car mats were mere machine oil, and those on the husband's shirt were just paint. Furthermore, multiple colleagues of Mike and Tim, who worked in different fields, corroborated that the two men had been at their workplaces all day and hadn't left until evening. This eliminated both men as suspects, as they hadn't had the opportunity to commit the crime at Kathy's house. The police, who had been convinced of one of the suspects' involvement, found themselves back at the starting point. They refocused on other potential suspects familiar with the victim and capable of entering her house without raising suspicions. As detectives questioned Kathy's relatives and friends, asking who they thought might be responsible, they discovered an intriguing pattern. Many of them, without hesitation, named one person: Greg. Greg, Kathy's brother-in-law, was flagged as a suspect due to his troublesome behavior, which her loved ones revealed she had frequently complained about. According to Kathy, Greg would openly flirt with her and persistently try to persuade her into intimate encounters. Moreover, he would often make inappropriate remarks about her stomach, a detail that aligned with the majority of stab wounds being located in that area. The police investigation uncovered Greg's history of illegal substance abuse and criminal past, prompting detectives to focus on him. They soon found a promising lead: a fingerprint and hair at Kathy's house matching Greg's. However, this evidence was not conclusive, as Greg regularly visited Kathy and her husband, potentially leaving behind the prints and hair prior to the murder. Kathy's parents were convinced of Greg's guilt. Her mother shared a telling anecdote. During a late-night hospital visit with her granddaughter, Greg appeared, causing the girl to glance at her grandmother with an unmistakable look of fear. After hearing this testimony, the detectives summoned Greg for questioning. He categorically denied any involvement in the murder, claiming to have been with a friend at the time, a friend with a notable criminal record. Mid-interrogation, Greg requested a brief absence to pay for additional parking time, allegedly to avoid a ticket, but he never returned to the station. Greg's wife's sister later recounted that on the day of the murder, Greg dropped her off at work around 10:30 a.m. and picked her up at 2:30 p.m., leaving him a 4-hour window that coincided with the time of the murder, providing a plausible opportunity to kill Kathy. Despite these suspicious circumstances, the police still lacked concrete evidence to link Greg to the crime. As a last resort, they decided to analyze the semen sample taken from the victim's body. At the time, forensic experts could only determine the blood type of the sample's owner. The blood type of the sample from Kathy's body matched Greg's, but this finding did not conclusively prove his guilt. Investigators were unable to make an arrest based on the available evidence, prompting a continued search for additional proof. However, despite their efforts, they were ultimately unable to prove Greg's involvement. The case eventually stalled, leaving Kathy's family frustrated and convinced of Greg's guilt, yet powerless to act. Meanwhile, Shelley, Kathy's sister, refused to accept that her husband was capable of such a heinous crime and chose to continue living with him in the years that followed. Detectives revisited the case in 1998, 11 years after the murder, seeking DNA analysis on the remaining semen sample. However, they only got a partial DNA profile, which showed Greg belonged to the 2% of the population matching it. When questioned, Greg changed his story, claiming a consensual relationship with Kathy, but detectives were skeptical, knowing such shifts are common in murder cases. Despite suspicions, they couldn't convict without a full DNA match, and the case went cold again. In 2002, detectives revived the investigation, enlisting the expertise of forensic scientist Catherine Long, a pioneer in DNA research. She and her team aimed to determine whether a perpetrator's DNA could linger on the victim's body after strangulation, and if so, whether it could be extracted for analysis. To test this theory, Catherine and her colleagues simulated strangulation, squeezing each other's necks, and then collected samples from their hands and the neck area. The results were striking. Even brief contact left behind sufficient skin particles for DNA analysis. Detectives re-examined Kathy's case, focusing on the lamp cord used to bind her hands. Since only the killer could have tightened it, they handed it over to Catherine for DNA analysis. Stored in a paper bag, the cord was swabbed from end to end, including blood-stained areas. 2 DNA profiles emerged, Kathy's and Greg's, providing strong evidence that Greg was the killer. 15 years after the murder, the suspect was arrested and denied involvement, claiming a romantic relationship with Kathy. However, DNA evidence led to his trial. While in prison, his cellmate reported that Greg confessed to the crime, boasting about killing Kathy after she resisted his advances and threatening to harm her son if she didn't comply. The detectives were convinced of the cellmate's veracity, given that he couldn't have possibly divined so many crucial details, even if he had carefully read about the case in the news. Empowered by the cellmate's testimony, the detectives confronted Greg, and this time, he finally broke down and confessed. He acknowledged his guilt in Kathy's murder, repeating the same admission he had made to his cellmate. Subsequently, he pleaded guilty in court and was handed a 45-year prison sentence, though he ultimately served only 4 years before succumbing to liver cancer at the age of 56. Kathy's husband, Mike, tragically didn't live to see the day of the killer's arrest, passing away at the age of 45. Her children and parents expressed gratitude to the detectives for finally bringing the case to a close, albeit 15 years later. Throughout that long and arduous wait, they had been almost certain that Greg was the perpetrator, yet they were forced to watch him continue living with their second. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Ryan Widmer. Ryan Widmer, a young athlete, was convicted of a horrific crime and is serving a life sentence with parole eligibility in 2025, over 10 years after the tragedy occurred. He is now fighting to overturn his conviction. The case has garnered widespread public attention across 3 neighboring states, sparking controversy surrounding his guilt. The unusual circumstances of Sarah Widmer's death and the lack of a clear motive for the crime have made this case highly controversial. Ryan and Sarah met at a local cafe they both frequented. When Ryan ordered a cup of coffee, Sarah noticed a book on his table that she had recently read. This shared interest in literature sparked a conversation that lasted several hours, covering topics such as books, movies, music, and their common interests. As they learned more about each other, they discovered a shared love for nature, traveling, and animals. With each successive meeting, their relationship grew closer and more trusting, eventually blossoming into true love. After a few months, Ryan and Sarah's relationship blossomed, and he proposed to her during a romantic dinner at the same cafe where they first met. Overjoyed, Sarah accepted his proposal. The young couple set a wedding date and began searching for a beautiful 2-story house in Hamilton. On April 10, 2008, they exchanged vows in a quaint and intimate church ceremony, surrounded by their closest friends and family. Sarah brought every detail to life, making the day truly unforgettable. She stunned in her white dress, leaving Ryan spellbound. Following the grand banquet, which was met with thunderous applause and joyful cheers, they embarked on a 2-week honeymoon to the Hawaiian Islands, where they reveled in each other's company and the breathtaking natural beauty. The young couple, deeply in love, had made plans for a future together, filled with hopes and dreams of starting a family. However, fate had other plans. On Monday, August 11, 2008, after Sarah finished her shift at the dental clinic, she met Ryan at her favorite cafe. They had dinner together, engaging in lively conversation, and afterwards walked home, where Sarah began sorting out the groceries she had bought. She then sat down on the couch, and Ryan handed her a glass of water and a pill, as she had complained of a headache during dinner. They spent the rest of the evening watching their favorite TV show, exchanging gentle kisses, and eventually, Sarah headed upstairs to the bedroom. She undressed, neatly folding her clothes, prepared a towel, lit scented candles, and put on her favorite music. Meanwhile, Ryan stayed downstairs, flipping channels on the TV remote, briefly stopping at a soccer game and lying on the couch for about 10 minutes. He called out to Sarah over the soft music, but she didn't respond. Ryan slowly made his way upstairs, entered the bedroom, and turned on the TV. He called out to Sarah again, but was met with silence. Panic started to set in, and he rushed to the bathroom, where he found Sarah lying face down in the tub. Ryan immediately pulled the plug and grabbed the phone to call emergency services. At 10:49 p.m., the service recorded the call, with Ryan frantically yelling that his wife had drowned in the bathtub, likely having fallen asleep. In his panic, Ryan failed to follow the dispatcher's instructions, wasting precious time. Under the dispatcher's careful guidance, Ryan eventually managed to pull Sarah out of the tub and performed CPR on her repeatedly. The ambulance, accompanied by police officers, arrived at the Widmer home just 6 minutes after the call. The police were initially drawn to the scene of the tragedy. Upon inspection, the bathroom appeared clean and dry, with no signs of water or scattered supplies that would indicate a hasty removal of a body from the water. The bathroom was meticulously clean. Sarah lay on the bedroom floor, nude with dry skin, but her wet hair suggested drowning. The bedroom was also tidy, leading law enforcement to suspect murder. Ryan, wearing only his underwear, was thrashing about the bedroom. When medical professionals found no pulse, they began performing cardiopulmonary resuscitation. A pinkish-white discharge from Sarah's nose and mouth confirmed drowning. Medical staff attempted to intubate Sarah twice as she lay on the bedroom floor, but both attempts failed. She was then rushed to an ambulance, where 2 more attempts were made to revive her heart using a defibrillator, again without success. Throughout the ordeal, Ryan remained by his wife's side, visibly distraught and anxious, as described by medical staff. Within 20 minutes of arriving at the hospital, medical staff attempted to revive Sarah, but at 11:41 p.m., an emergency physician pronounced her dead. Ryan, overcome with grief, fell to his knees in the hospital hallway and wept. The sudden tragedy that occurred just 4 months after the wedding sent shockwaves throughout the city, and Ryan became the prime suspect in the murder of his young wife. Ryan's initial statement, given at the hospital, raised doubts about its accuracy. He claimed that only he and his wife were at home, and that nothing out of the ordinary had happened. They had dinner at a cafe, returned home, and watched TV together. Sarah had a headache, and he gave her painkillers and helped her to the bathroom when he found her. However, the emergency call record showed that the victim was lying face down, contradicting Ryan's account. The man was distraught, repeatedly calling out for Sarah. Under pressure from the investigator, Ryan shifted from being a victim to a participant in the investigation, working to uncover what had happened to Sarah that night. He agreed to let investigators search their house. Analysis of the medication Sarah took revealed it was a common painkiller, but it was discovered that Sarah's frequent headaches and migraines had led her to take a course of drugs that altered her hormonal balance, causing uncontrollable sleep. This became the initial theory behind Sarah's death. After searching the house, police found bloodstains on the carpet. When they arrived, the bathtub was dry and there were no wet towels. The tile floor was also dry and clean, leading police to suspect that Sarah had been murdered. No wet items, clothing, or other objects were found in the house that could have been used to soak up water. Ryan's statements during the 911 call and at the hospital were contradictory, which raised suspicions and turned him from a victim into a suspect. An examination of Sarah's body revealed bruises on her forehead, neck, armpit, and upper lip, as well as lacerations on her upper lip. However, there was no clear evidence of a struggle, as her fingernails were not broken or chipped, and there were no marks on her hands, elbows, or knees. Ryan's body also showed no signs of injury or struggle. An investigation by Sheriff Bishop was inconclusive, as all the bathroom supplies were in place, and there were no signs of resistance. It was unclear whether Sarah had taken a bath that evening, or if she had not resisted and allowed her husband to drown her. Sarah's autopsy, led by Dr. Russell Apt Grove, revealed that the cause of death was drowning, accompanied by multiple muscle hemorrhages in the front of her neck and contusions on her scalp. These injuries, which occurred before her death, raised many questions, but their origin remained unknown. The investigation struggled to make progress with no leads or answers. The toxicology tests found no traces of illicit or alcoholic substances in Sarah's blood. On August 13, 2008, Ryan was arrested on suspicion of aggravated murder of his wife. The decision was based on the discrepancies in the emergency call and the crime scene, as well as the injuries found on Sarah's body. This evidence was sufficient to charge him with her murder by drowning. Despite Ryan and Sarah's seemingly perfect relationship, with friends and neighbors testifying to their deep love for each other, and their public displays of affection, no one could understand what drove them to such a tragic end. In March 2009, the first court hearing took place. Ron Cronenberger, the emergency dispatcher who received the call, testified as a witness. He described Ryan as remaining calm during their conversation, stating that it seemed like Ryan was pretending to perform CPR by blowing into the tube. The prosecution argued that the 911 call, the crime scene, and Sarah's injuries provided sufficient evidence to prove Ryan's guilt. They alleged that Ryan had forcibly drowned Sarah by holding her underwater in a bathtub. The bathtub was a crucial piece of evidence in the case. Upon examination, police found fingerprint streaks, supposedly left by human hands, closer to the middle of the tub. Using a reflected ultraviolet imaging process, fingerprints and smears were detected on the tub. A forearm print was identified, and a hair follicle test revealed that it was left by an adult male, although the exact age of the print could not be determined. However, the bathtub was not the critical evidence needed to prove the struggle between Ryan and Sarah. The prosecution suggested to the jury that a violent altercation likely occurred that night at the Widmer home for unknown reasons, and that the suspect deliberately kept quiet about it. The defense team called in an expert to testify that it is highly unlikely for someone to fall asleep and drown in a bathtub unless they were under the influence of illegal drugs or alcohol. The expert explained that the sensation of water on the face would normally wake a person up or trigger a gag reflex, causing them to cough or choke. Even if the person didn't wake up, the lack of oxygen would eventually rouse them. The pathologist who performed the autopsy testified that if Sarah's body was dry, but her hair was wet, it could indicate that her head was forcibly pushed off the edge of a bathtub, toilet, or sink. This could have happened while her head was facing forward or backward, whether the water was running or the bathtub was full. The prosecution argued that Ryan held Sarah's head underwater until she drowned, making him guilty of the crime. On the other hand, the defense argued that Ryan was innocent, primarily because there was no clear motive for the alleged crime. They pointed out that if there had been a violent struggle, as the prosecution claimed, there would be evidence of it. However, there were no injuries on Ryan, and Sarah's fingernails showed no signs of breaking or chipping, suggesting that there was no struggle. They claimed that the injuries found on Sarah were caused by the prolonged CPR, direct cardiac massage, and repeated intubation attempts made that night at the house, in the ambulance, and at the hospital. At the defense's request, Dr. Werner Spitz performed a second autopsy on Sarah. He confirmed that the cause of death was drowning and observed injuries to her neck, arms, upper lip, skull, a lacerated liver, and bleeding on her neck. However, he couldn't determine whether these injuries occurred during CPR. It was argued that the EMTs tried to resuscitate Sarah for about 45 minutes and that the deep neck bleeding likely resulted from an IV inserted in that area. The EMTs had been unable to access her arm veins. Instead of ruling it a homicide, Dr. Spitz concluded that Sarah's death was undetermined. The defense based their case on the fact that Sarah's skin was dry, which dries faster than her hair. They conducted experiments to demonstrate that when Ryan found his wife unconscious, he instinctively pulled the drain plug to try and help her, and then called emergency services. This sequence of events explains why her body was drier than expected. The water had already drained from the bathtub by the time Ryan called 911. An expert witness demonstrated that a person can dry off in as little as 7 minutes after emerging from the water. A second court hearing was set for May 2010. Ryan's father, Gary, claimed that the prosecution had obtained DNA results showing that Sarah had the disease, but the prosecutor refused to disclose them, believing they wouldn't have changed the jury's verdict. However, it remains uncertain whether the jury's decision would have been different if they had received reliable evidence about Sarah's medical condition, which could have contributed to her drowning. The official reason for denying a retrial was the jury's errors in their investigation. Despite another unsuccessful court hearing, Ryan remained incarcerated. The Widmer family received an unwelcome shock when Jennifer Cruz arrived at the prosecutor's office to testify against Ryan, claiming he was guilty. She identified herself as a friend of Ryan's, stating that they had regular communication via phone or email. According to Jennifer, Ryan contacted her on October 26, 2009 at 11:09 p.m., and his voice was highly distressed. He confided in her, saying that he had assaulted Sarah in the living room on the day she died. The trigger for the altercation was Sarah's discovery of Ryan's infidelity, leading to a prolonged argument that started downstairs and continued in the bedroom. Ryan pushed Sarah into the bathroom, leaving her without checking on her well-being. After calming down, he found Sarah floating lifelessly in the full bathtub. In an attempt to cover his tracks, Ryan allegedly wiped the water from the bathroom floor using towels and concocted a story about the accident. However, Ryan's defense team vigorously disputed Jennifer's testimony, pointing out several inconsistencies. The lawyers argued that Jennifer's account was implausible, as no wet towels were found anywhere in the house, including the dryer. Furthermore, there was no evidence of infidelity in Ryan and Sarah's marriage. The family was financially stable, and they never quarreled. Ryan's friends described him as a kind, helpful, and even-tempered person who never displayed anger. Additionally, Ryan stood to gain nothing from Sarah's death, as they did not have a life insurance policy. Before the third trial, Jennifer Cruz's credibility was called into question, and she was prevented from testifying as a witness. This was partly due to evidence of her past infidelities and petty theft convictions. Additionally, a phone call in which Ryan allegedly confessed to her was not corroborated. In January 2011, a new trial was held, prompted by the discovery of fresh evidence. The defense presented a medical opinion suggesting that Sarah's sudden loss of consciousness and subsequent drowning might have been caused by her underlying medical condition. Medical experts testified that Sarah's existing cardiac or neurological defects could have led to her losing consciousness, but the state's medical experts disputed these claims. Sarah's co-workers revealed that she often slept in her car before starting her shift at the dental clinic, and that she frequently suffered from allergies and stomach pains. On the day of her death, Sarah mentioned to her co-worker, Dr. Benjamin Mesmer, that she was experiencing a headache and stomach pain. Later that evening, a friend spoke with Sarah, observing that she looked extremely tired and complained of a headache and neck pain. Sarah's friends were aware of her ability to fall asleep easily in unexpected places, with one even speculating that she might have had narcolepsy. However, Sarah's mother testified that her daughter did not have any sleep disorders and was a healthy child who regularly underwent medical examinations, which showed she was in perfect health. The defense argued that Sarah's death was not caused by forced drowning because she didn't have any injuries to the small bones of her neck or defensive wounds on her arms and legs. Although the defense couldn't explain how Sarah died, an emergency medicine expert testified that every year, approximately 300,000 people die suddenly in the United States, and in about 33% of those cases, autopsy results are normal and show no underlying medical conditions. After deliberating for 12 hours, the jury found Ryan guilty of murder and sentenced him to 15 years in prison. Basing their decision on the fact that Sarah's body was not wet, Ryan's past history, and their belief that he had staged his 911 call. Ryan's family has passionately defended him, and the case, which dates back over 10 years, continues to unite like-minded individuals who hope to clear his name through DNA testing. While genetic material often plays a crucial role in resolving disputed charges and exonerations in cases involving unexplained deaths, what sets this case apart is the unusual request for the victim's DNA, rather than the person convicted. Unfortunately, a Warren County judge has already rejected Ryan Widmer's request to have the victim's DNA tested. Mike Allen, a former Hamilton prosecutor, noted that after listening to all 3 trials, he never found a clear motive, which is unusual in a murder case. However, the prosecutor is not required to prove motive, which makes this case even more peculiar. Ryan Widmer is awaiting a federal court decision on a motion for his release. He has been imprisoned for 14 years, and his first opportunity for release will be in July 2025 unless a federal judge rules in his favor. According to University of Cincinnati law professor Donald Custer, who also works with the Ohio Innocence Project, proving innocence is not enough to be exonerated. There must be evidence of a constitutional error in the judicial process. In 2025, Widmer will be eligible for parole, but his lawyers believe it's unlikely he'll be granted parole because the parole board tends to favor inmates who express remorse, whereas Widmer maintains his innocence.